Welcome in, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
This is Everything Sucks, Let's Fix It, episode 32.
My name is Anthony Buono.
My name is Ben Mayer. Today is January 23rd, 2024. It's the day of the New Hampshire primary. We're not really going to be talking about it because the votes are still coming in right now, and so it doesn't make a ton of sense. There's not a lot that we have to say, but there's a lot of other things going on, including the dropout of our favorite person ever.
Oh, Ron. Oh, Ronald McDonald DeSantis meatball man. How you deserved more than this, my friend. You did. You deserved better.
I don't know about that.
Well, listen, if we rewind to November 2022, when the Republican red wave doesn't exist, they get wiped out in the Pennsylvania Senate. They get wiped out in Georgia. They lose Nevada, right? Everyone is looking around, blaming people, and obviously the person to blame is Donald Trump. Donald Trump picked Dr. Oz to run for Senate. He picked Herschel Walker. All of these Republican candidates he picked Kari Lake. All of these Republican candidates across the United States were handpicked by Donald Trump, and they all lost. And so Republicans, as they should be doing in that moment, looked around the country and it's like, okay, well, who's doing well? And they looked down to Sunshine, Florida, and they saw Ronald Meatball DeSantis, and he won by like 20-something points, like 19 points.
Yeah, he won by a lot, and the people love him as governor.
He has a great approval rating in Florida. He did great with Hispanics. He won Miami-Dade County. Republicans look to him, and they're like, wow, if we could just put this guy in the general election, he'll beat Biden no problem. So if we go back to the polls back then, and we see where the Republican primary was at right after that, we had Donald Trump at like 45%, and Ron DeSantis at 35%. That's a close race. If you're only in a 10-point difference nationally, all you need is some Iowa, New Hampshire momentum, and bam, you're in the running.
Especially considering the cult of personality that Trump has, like that's fantastic.
Like that indicated that at some point, Ron DeSantis broke into that Trump cult of personality,
yes,
convinced a bunch of Trump cultists that Trump can't win nationally and that they needed to go into a new direction. But then Ron DeSantis stepped in front of people and everyone hated him.
True. And also, Donald Trump got indicted.
Ooh, true.
And that's when the polling really just started to diverge and never came back to being close.
Because the second Trump got to stand there as a true or quote-unquote martyr, right?
Yeah.
The second he got to do that and put himself on the metaphorical cross like that, the Republican base rallied around him with open arms and were like, we are here to save you so you can become president and pardon yourself, I guess.
Totally. No, it was so much of an attack against someone that they personally identified with.
Yeah.
That it was like, even if someone could be better, I want to vote for him as a show of support.
Yes.
For what this man is going through.
I'm going to be honest, this is very history nerd of me, but this is so similar to the Julius Caesar situation right before the Roman Civil War, I swear to God. So like Julius Caesar was the whole reason the Roman Civil War started was really because of the persecution of not the Roman citizenry or in income inequality or any other reasons we think of revolutions in today's standards. This Roman Civil War started because of the quote-unquote persecution of the single man of Julius Caesar. They were saying that he could not become the consul again. They were saying that he had to demobilize his military because he became too strong. And they were saying that he had to give up some of his fortune or distribute some money in a different way. And because of that, because he was individually attacked, he took all of his troops and marched into Rome. And people rallied around him. And Caesar said, he's like, first, basically his mindset was, first they'll come for me, then they'll come for you. And that's exactly what Trump's rhetoric is.
Yes.
He really portrays himself as the wall between the establishment and everyone else. And he has convinced this class of the working class that if it wasn't for him, the establishment would be knocking down their door and charging them with insurrection. But that's just not the case.
No, it's not the case. And I'm not even sure that I don't think that that's exactly the mindset. I think it's a little bit more metaphorical. It's a little bit more like, I'm the one who gets you and who brings you in. I'm the one who accepts you and lifts you up. Everyone else out there, everyone else online and in most of the mainstream media, they tell you you're bad. They tell you you're not a good person because you vote Republican, because you are pro-life, because of all these things, because of all these culture war issues that they're kind of losing on and they're out in the zeitgeist for. Trump is like, no, they're wrong. you're good. And then it's like, okay, if Trump goes away, there is no one standing in the way of telling me I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm going to be ostracized.
Yeah. And they cling to him. So DeSantis really only had one chance. He really only had the chance of winning in Iowa. That was his only bet to win this campaign. And he raised a lot of money to do so. So DeSantis raised about $130 million. And this was between himself and his super PAC. And this is really weird that we can say like DeSantis has a super PAC, because super PACs are supposed to be totally outside of the Democratic, of the presidential campaign. They're not supposed to communicate at all. So the fact that we just casually say DeSantis' super PAC is that's messed up. But his super PAC, between the super PAC Never Back Down and his campaign, they had $130 million. Well, Never Back Down spent $34 million in ads in the state of state of Iowa. And the DeSantis campaign spent $19 million in ads.
That's crazy. That's $53 million.
$53 million to only get 21% of the vote, which is only 23,420 votes, which means it was $2,263 per vote. Wow. That's how much he spent. Donald Trump, he spent $328 per vote.
It makes you think, like, it kind of sucks that these candidates and these super PACs can't just directly buy people shit to get their votes, right? Like spending even $328 per vote, that would be able to lock votes in, especially for the Republican primary.
Oh yeah. I'll give you $300 if you go vote for me. It would be more effective to do that than to buy all these stupid ads.
Yeah, totally.
Oh my God. Thank God you can't do that.
Yeah, it's a good thing
you can't do that. We're not saying that you should be able to bribe voters, but
no.
Would have been a better use of money. Probably.
The thing I have to say that I've been excited to say for a long time is the fact that his super PAC is called Never Back Down, and now he's out after the Iowa primary.
So some may say he backed down.
Yeah.
Oh man, dude, it's just he's such a mean candidate. Yeah. And what makes it so much more funny, right? The humor in it is that he basically got scammed.
You think so?
Yeah. So this guy, Jeff Rowe, he was the main political consultant to the Never Back Down super PAC. He's the leader of Axiom Strategies. Now, this guy has been involved in numerous races and is an icon in Republican politics, but there's just one issue. He loses all the fucking time. So really good recent examples are Adam Laxalt in Nevada, lost. Carla Sands in Pennsylvania, he lost. Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, he lost. Jim Lamon in Arizona, he lost. Josh Mandel in Ohio, he lost. Martha McSally, Arizona, lost. She lost twice, and he backed her twice. This is the guy who you hired as your consultant, who has a hardcore losing record. Apparently, guys in the Never Back Down PAC wanted to pick him up, not for his quote-unquote genius, but because they wanted to take him away from Nikki Haley, so Nikki Haley couldn't grab him. But why would you hire him in the first place? Now the dude's running around buying second, third houses. He's living large.
Yeah. It's funny because I just looked up his Wikipedia page really quick. He also has advised the presidential campaigns of Mike Huckabee, Rick Perry, and Ted Cruz.
Oh, wow.
Which, as far as I remember, have never been president.
Yeah, they've never been president.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
No.
Yeah, okay. So, again, it's so funny I guess they hired him because if he ran the Ted Cruz presidential campaign, Ted Cruz won Iowa. So I guess they were thinking like, oh, maybe if he won Iowa with Ted Cruz, he would know exactly what to do to get DeSantis over the finish line.
I think that's even a reach.
Yeah,
it seems like this guy has just kind of found his way into the Republican Party. And now, like, I don't know how he got a reputation, but the fact that he's, like, I'm seeing those presidential candidate names. He advised Glenn Youngkin, DeSantis, Kevin McCarthy, apparently. So these congressional races and statewide races, it seems like he's had some success in. Maybe they just give him a good reputation, better than he deserves.
Glenn Youngkin could give a man a good reputation. That was a very well-run campaign. But I hope Republicans learn their lesson and don't hire Jeff Rowe again. Or you know what? Maybe as a Democrat, no, I hope you keep hiring Jeff Rowe. Keep that going.
Yeah, keep paying him.
Keep paying that guy and get him a new house. So Meatball Ron is gone, and that just leaves us with Nikki Haley and Donald Trump. By the time you see this video, the New Hampshire results will be made public. I kind of just want to say, like, if Nikki Haley loses in New Hampshire and all that's left is Donald Trump, this will be the fastest non-incumbent Republican primary in the modern history.
Yeah.
It'll be the fastest. Donald Trump would have been anointed without competition. It will not have to go to a national primary. If Nikki Haley loses New Hampshire, it's done. Trump will be the nominee. And we all have to reckon with that and deal with that. And Republicans need to soul search a lot, because there are a lot of Republicans who don't want Trump. And they're going to need to think what direction they want this country to go in. And it's going to be a hard decision for them.
It does seem like a very unique circumstance as far as modern history to have this lame duck president who just lost the last general election like pretty handily.
Oh, yeah.
And is being handed the opportunity to do so again pretty much without competition.
No, pretty much without competition. That's what shocks me so much. Like, none of them went hard enough when they should have, right? Nikki Haley should have came out of the gate and said Trump is a deranged lunatic coward who, is going to be arrested and is delusional and can't form. She should have come out of the gate with that.
I don't know, because Chris Christie came out of the gate with that, right?
Well, but he was doing well in New Hampshire. So if she loses New Hampshire, I blame her not going hard enough. And look at DeSantis. DeSantis tried the pussyfooting. DeSantis tried the out Trump. And DeSantis, tried to play nice, and he couldn't.
Sure.
You can't play nice with him. I think the only way to beat Trump is to go lower, embarrass him.
I don't know within this Republican electorate, though. I don't know if there was a way around it. I feel like he just marshaled support so well because of the personal connection that people felt.
Think there was no way to beat Trump this cycle? It was just going to be him.
I can't imagine. Like, I'm trying to think. Was there another candidate? I don't think that the strategy that Haley or DeSantis, for example, could have taken, if it were very different, would have actually changed the outcome. Yeah.
And so then where does that leave the Republican Party? Is the Republican Party just locked to Trump for the foreseeable future? I mean, what happens in 2028? What happens in the next midterm elections? Like, where does this leave a party if everyone is kind of bought into the delusion? Or like the voters are bought into the delusion, but the elected officials really aren't.
Yeah.
These elected officials like Kevin McCarthy and all these other guys, Mike Johnson, they all know the truth.
Yes, I think it slowly but surely reverts back to what it was. I think without him as a figurehead, the far right that embodies Trumpism, the Matt Gaetz, the House Freedom Caucus, they will stay. They will keep their message strong, but they're not going to completely dominate the party. They're not going to have as much power over the House as they once did, because right now Trump has all this power because he can destroy Republican candidates or Republican politicians with his tweets or with what he says. And that is going to slowly go away if he loses. If he wins, buys another 10 years of this.
I think it might be... Do you mean win the primary or win the presidency?
Win the presidency.
I think Trump might have that power for as long as he's alive.
Maybe.
I think, but the numbers will just diminish over time. I just don't know if the Republican Party stays nationally relevant if Trump can send out a tweet and sink 20% support for the national figurehead for the president. Right? If we see these exit polls come out in New Hampshire tonight, we saw the exit polls come out of Iowa, right, where 20% of Iowa primary voters would not vote for Donald Trump. We also saw 30% of Iowa voters would not vote for Nikki Haley. So what does that mean? It almost means that Donald Trump is their best bet, because the Republicans, who are the base of the Republican Party, won't rally around the establishment. They don't want to revert, and they're going to fight back from that reverting.
I think this depends on two things. One, the results of his trials. If he is convicted, that martyrs him further.
I agree.
And support for this idea of the man will continue for longer. If not, and he just loses the election, then it's going to whittle away more and more, because this spike that we've seen to draw him away from DeSantis in the first place
was the indictments.
Exactly.
Right.
It was the indictments, and that energy for the Republican base is going to wear off. And then you're going to have more Republican voters that are nearer to the margins, that care less about the man of Trump, the personality, the cult of personality, and who care more about issues and more about Republicans winning. And they're going to start to say, we need, especially with a second loss in a row in the presidential election.
Absolutely.
They're going to be, especially to Joe Biden,
right,
who they see as so weak.
Right. What does it say about Donald Trump, who thinks Joe Biden is so weak that he lost to him and then might lose to him again, right? Doesn't that make you twice as weak?
It would make you twice as weak if
you believe that you actually lost.
Exactly.
Which, he does not proclaim
that he does not.
Right. Publicly.
Yeah.
I just think it's just going to be a very interesting election. We see a lot of people going into the polls in New Hampshire, and this one old woman who they interviewed, they asked her, like, why are you voting today? And she's like, well, I'm a registered Republican. I voted for Trump in 2016, but I'm voting for Nikki Haley. And they're like, why are you voting for Nikki Haley today? And she's like, because I grew up in a constitutional democracy and I want to remain in a constitutional democracy, and I want constitutional democracy for my children. And then she goes on and on about how my father fought in World War II to defeat the fascists, and I'm not going to let him win. Based old woman.
Yeah.
God, that is the type of American spirit I want everyone to have going into the voting booth. Because at the end of the day, we can totally disagree on policy. Like, I don't agree with Liz Cheney on anything. But when Liz Cheney makes the point, she's like, I disagree with Joe Biden on a lot of stuff, but we can have arguments about the size of the child tax credit, how we do border policy, what the corporate tax rate is. We can't have disagreements on a dictatorial leader. We can't have somebody come out and say that he wants to get rid of term limits. As Trump has said, he has said so many times that he jokes about how he's going to be in office and then for 4 more years and then maybe longer, right? So he says exactly what he wants. You just got to believe him.
Yeah, and it's frustrating that in right-wing media specifically, it's not portrayed as that kind of a threat, despite him saying that, despite there being a whole plan out called Project 2025, which we're going to do a deep dive on sooner rather than later, which is from the Heritage Foundation, I think, which is a plan to consolidate executive branch power by ousting kind of the lifelong bureaucrats who have been there. When these ideas are all out there, when they're all public and they're not covered, or they're not covered as super threatening. Mm-hmm. They're not covered as threatening compared to the crisis at our border.
Right.
And that's where people are confused. That's where people start to think our country has gone to shit and we need someone else. We need someone like Trump to shake things up and bring us out of it, rather than our country is actually doing pretty okay.
Right.
Our country relatively is doing pretty well, and Trump is the one thing that could send us into chaos and into dictatorship, which is something that is the most fundamental value we have.
And he goes on these speeches and rants praising Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, praising the strong man. And he says America needs a strong man. He said that out loud. He's like, sometimes you need a strong man. Like, how much louder do you need the dog whistle to be before your ears start bleeding and you finally get it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just important that we take that type of energy going into the voting year of 2024. Whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, it doesn't really matter. What you have to be is for the liberal values that made America. Thomas Jefferson would be rolling in his grave if he knew that half of the country was voting for a strong man like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right. Let's move on to some interesting news about child tax credits.
Sure.
So we talked last week about the expansion of the child tax credit nationally and how there is a deal being cooked up in the Senate for an expansion of the child tax credit, not as much as it was expanded under the American Rescue Plan, but still a solid expansion, like $200 more for the first year, $300 for the next, $400 for the next.
And so the American Rescue Plan was the legislation that the Biden administration put out in 2021, I believe. That's when he came into office as a response to COVID, to subsidize families, give them more buying power.
Perfect. Yeah. So now states are interested in, what if we did our own child tax credit? What if we did it on the state level as well on the federal level? So the Illinois Economic Policy Institute worked on this with other Illinois elected officials and economists in the state. And so they were trying to see what a state level tax credit would be able to do. Well, they outlined 5 major points that it could benefit. So it would reduce childhood poverty by at least 10%, directly impact at least half of all Illinois' children, cut income taxes by at least 10% for eligible households, improve racial equity, boosting Illinois' economy by at least $1 billion annually. Now, these are all very amazing things. And now with the child tax credit, it all matters about how it's being formulated. So the Illinois Economic Policy Institute go through 7 different scenarios. I'm not going to go through every 7 because that could be its whole deep dive on its own. But the point is that the major scenario they're focusing on is, what if we gave a tax credit of about $1,200 every year? This is something that's already been passed in the Senate, that has already been proposed in the Senate and proposed in the House in Illinois. And this would achieve all 5 of those goals. $1,200 a month. $1,200 for every child would improve all 5 of those metrics. So the long-term gains are drastic. Not just obviously to child poverty, to child hunger, but also actually help with the Illinois' economic growth. So for every dollar committed by the state of Illinois towards this child tax credit, it would produce $1.17 to $1.45 in economic output. This is a large economic multiplier. That means that this money is actually very, very efficient in the way it's going to, move through the economy and get back into the Illinois Treasury through increased taxes of economic growth. Now, this corroborates the studies that were done on the American Rescue Plan's child tax credit, where the American Rescue Plan tax credit had a 1.25 economic multiplier effect. So it's nice to see that 2 separate studies of similar policy resulted in the same result. You always want to see that type of be able to duplicate
consistency.
That.
Yeah,
you want to see that consistency, and so that's what we're seeing. The child tax credit is getting more and more value proven with every study that comes out about it. And so what's great about this is not only is it increasing the economic multiplier, growing the economy faster, lifting children out of poverty, it's also reducing the amount of money that Illinois will have to spend on anti-poverty programs, such as the Protection for Women, Infants, and Children. For the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infant, and Children, the WIC program, and the Earned Income Tax Credit as well. So all of these other services actually get reduced, and Illinois ends up saving $115 million every year, a 15.4% reduction into what they were spending on these programs before the child tax credit going into place.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It's just all positive news, and it makes it difficult for me when such positive news comes out about these economic policies when it receives pushback, because okay, if I can prove to you that it increases economic growth, if I can prove to you that the money being spent goes directly to food, shelter, and children's products, if I can prove to you that it reduces the need of welfare programs, what more do you need to see until you finally get on board with such a policy?
Exactly. If it not only helps everyone who's a recipient, but also means the government is going to spend less money because it doesn't have to pay so much for those welfare programs, you kind of start to get to the point where the only argument I can hear in return is, I don't want to give that party the win.
Or I don't want to give that party the win, or it's against my philosophy, right?
Yeah.
It's against my ideology. I don't believe in welfare.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, do you accept your mortgage tax reduction as a homeowner? If you do that, are you receiving welfare? This is a person receiving a tax credit for having a child the same way you receive a tax credit for having a mortgage.
Even this is it is such a stretch to try to make that argument. We're talking about a tax cut.
Yeah.
That's the most Republican thing I can imagine.
Yes, and I love the framing of this as a tax cut.
Yeah.
Letting you keep more of your own money.
Exactly.
So there's really this is something that Republicans and Democrats should be able to get behind. We're seeing it on the national level slightly, not as much as I want to see it, but it's happening slowly. If this starts happening state by state and then eventually happens to the federal government, we're talking about a reduction in child poverty like 75%, like you've never seen.
Yeah.
If everything goes well.
I really love the idea of going state by state. If these are the numbers that can play out in other states, which I wouldn't be surprised about, right? Like that's going to build the political pressure that you need going up to the federal level.
Yeah.
At the federal level, I expect things are much harder to get done because the parties do, especially the current Republican Party, does care so much more about not letting the Democrats get a win.
Oh, for sure.
Right? And at the state level, you'll find a lot of these states where there are more significant majorities on either side. And I would love to see if some Republican heavy majorities, right, passed something like this to show that it doesn't have to be a partisan effort because of the kind of evidence that we're seeing.
Yeah, and this is one of those issues where, look, I appreciate the diversification of the American government. Justice Brandeis in the 1920s and 30s always said, the states are the laboratories of democracy, and this is what should be happening now. We should see those types of experiments. And an expanded child tax credit on the statewide level, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat state, is something everyone should be able to get behind. It should not be a financial burden to have a child, or at least a financial burden that's going to put that child in poverty.
Definitely not. No, of course not.
There's no reason.
The one piece of context I will add, just because we've kind of been alluding to it. We talked about the child tax credit at the federal level last week. I feel like we might be making it seem like Democrats are significantly more in favor of this than the Republicans. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I haven't seen that. The bill at the federal level was introduced by a Democrat and a Republican. We talked about resistance on both sides to the bill for different reasons. The Democrats wanted more assistance in the child tax credit. The Republicans didn't. They were reluctant. It didn't seem like they would find a path to tie it up in a package of other legislation that they would be okay with. So I'm not sure if this a partisan thing.
Well, if we look at the House, it's a partisan thing. No Republican will vote for this in the House of Representatives. Maybe like 2.
None of them.
Maybe 3 or 4.
Okay.
Max.
Well, because the co-author of the bill
is a House
Republican.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's just not. I think it's one of like those New York Republicans.
Okay.
Right, where they're like in a Biden plus 10 seat.
Okay.
And so it's not this. But there again, that doesn't mean in the Senate that it's not, right? So we've seen this time and time again where the bipartisan infrastructure bill was voted on by like 25 Senate Republicans or 20 Senate Republicans, or the CHIPS Act was by like 20 Senate Republicans. It didn't get a lot of Republican support in the House, but it got that support in the Senate, and that's what I expect to happen with the child tax credit as well.
Okay.
It's one of those things. But the people in the House, I feel, have a less ideological aversion to it and more of a I don't want Joe Biden to win aversion to it.
Yeah. That's my feeling, at least.
No, and I agree with that. Yeah. But child tax credit on the Illinois level, let's get it going, guys. Be the first, please.
Yeah, it's super exciting. I do just love seeing on a broader level, state level innovation policy like this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like no one was talking about child tax credit at the state level, and they just came out with this.
And then something I'm working on in Brookline locally is I'm trying to get a municipal level child allowance. I'm working on raising the money for it right now through a social wealth fund. But what I hope that money can turn into is a yearly child allowance that's being paid for by the growth in the S&P 500.
That would be amazing.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
So thanks, guys. All right, cool. Now let's move on to the IRS kicking ass. The tax police are out, baby.
Yep.
The tax police are kicking down doors and coming after all those millionaire and billionaire tax cheats. So far this year, the IRS has pulled $520 million from millionaire households. This is about, I think, like 1,000 households.
Yeah.
1,000 people were skipping out on $520 million. If you want law and order, Joe Biden is your man. If you want law and order, the Democrat Party is the law and order party, because we are the ones who busted down the doors and got this money from the people who stole it from you. Okay? So, which I just fucking love that. So why am I saying the Democrats did this? Well, they, in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, they authorized $80 billion for the IRS. This is and this $80 billion would be dispersed to the IRS in the course of a decade. So more than half of the money was earmarked to revive flagging enforcement of corporations, partnerships, and rich households. This is just giving the cops the money they need to go after criminals. That's all we're doing here, guys. Mm-hmm. There's no like scheme to go out and get you, and the IRS isn't coming for those small potatoes tax issues where you're accidentally claiming the earned income tax credit when you're not supposed to claim that tax credit. specifically, the Treasury Department in the Biden administration has specified that they will not be increasing audit rates for people making under $400,000. Which, if that's where you're going to be at, who is against going after the taxes that are justly paid by people making more than 400 grand?
Yeah, I don't. It's a hard argument,
right? I have no sympathy for you. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Now, the White House has agreed with Republicans to claw back $20 million of that money in the Joe Biden McCarthy Jeffries deal that McCarthy got thrown out of the House of Representatives for, if we remember that fiasco, right? One of the reasons Kevin McCarthy lost his job was because he didn't cut government spending enough. Mm-hmm. And one way in which he was successful was by getting the Biden administration to claw back some IRS money. Well, because Republicans couldn't say yes, that money is still out there planned for disbursement.
Yep.
So the sped up clawback of that $20 billion wouldn't really affect the IRS all that much today. These things were supposed to be like earmarked and allocated for projects 8, 9, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So our immediate enforcement is only going to be keeping going strong. And it's just really great to see the rich kind of get their own right now.
Yeah, this is something that I would hope can resonate with a really wide base of people. Mm-hmm. Because when I think of populism on the left or the right, it's not just the government that's the enemy, right? It's the rich.
No, it's a monopoly of power, period.
Yeah, which I would think could kind of be conflicting in people's heads because they're automatically anti-government, but then it's like, oh, but the government is going after these other people who have hoarded all the money, which has made our lives worse. Which quickly, I'm just going to go on a little tangent, reminds me of a recent report that came out, for example, that half of inflation since the end of 2022 has been due to, it's called greedflation, due to profiteering.
That makes you want to start a revolution.
Isn't that crazy? No, it's literally like they charted the producer's price index against the consumer's price index, and the consumer's price index rose at twice the rate of the producer's price index.
Wow, that's crazy.
Isn't that insane? So yeah, like the government is the one that is trying to go after these people who are hoarding all of your money and skimming off every single cent that they can.
And you should be happy about that.
Yeah.
I mean, like let's think back to the George Floyd protests of everyone saying defund the police, mm-hmm. right? There's a lot of issues with the defund the police philosophy. Guess what, guys? The IRS is the fucking police. Okay, so all we're doing is funding the police, and the amount of money we get back from that funding is just going to be astronomical.
Yeah,
right?
I think your comparison is pretty flawed.
Why do you think?
Because defunding the police and the general idea of policing crime, is more about people's safety.
Okay,
and this is less about it.
I guess there's a difference between white collar crime and standard crime.
I think so.
Right. Okay. But this classifies white collar crime, and I like to see an
It
executive.
is still crime, of course.
Right. It's still crime.
Yeah.
I like to see an executive branch going after white collar crime at the veracity that it deserves. I feel like veracity. That's a word.
Veracity.
I don't know.
Voracity.
I don't know, bro. I can't speak English most days.
Yeah.
Veracity. Okay. So I just, it makes me happy. I only want this to keep going. I want this to only get more and more enforced. Mm-hmm. It's important that we put in perspective that this was opposed by every Republican in the House and Senate. Every Republican was against increasing IRS funding, mm-hmm. even though the amount of money we get for each dollar put into the IRS only comes back or twofold because of how much money we're able to get from increasing our tax enforcement.
Yeah, there's a very unhelpful stigma against the IRS as the tax man, right? But the fact of the matter is our institutions are going to function better with not only with more money, but with a stronger rule of law in this way that there isn't a plutocracy starting in this country.
Absolutely.
Right? Where the rich get treated differently from the poor.
Yeah.
And to enforce the laws strictly against the rich, against the people who are most privileged, is the only way we retain a democratic republic.
Definitely. You can't have inequality in the face of the law.
Exactly.
So now, to keep going through the Biden wins, it looks like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has a proposal for limiting bank overdraft fees. So for decades, large financial institutions were able to issue highly profitable overdraft loans, which garnered them billions of dollars in revenue annually. So this is anytime you go and pay with your debit card and you accidentally pay more money out with your debit card than you had in your bank account. So the bank loans you that money. If your checking account reaches below zero, it loans you that difference and then charges you a fee for that loan after you, or when you pay it back, right? So that fee is extremely expensive. People don't really think about it, but we need to put it in perspective. So the overdraft fee creates $10 billion in assets for these financial institutions. No, I'm sorry. That's incorrect. The proposal will only be affected on financial institutions that have over $10 billion in assets.
Yes.
Which covers about 175 of the largest depository institutions in the country. Now, each one of these overdraft fees is normally $35. Now, what's so crazy about this is the most common amount of money to be overdrafted is $26. So if you're only down $26 out of your checking account, and then your fee is $35 for the overdraft fee, that's an annual interest rate.
I don't think you've said this yet. It's $35 per day.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know if everyone knows that. I've overdrafted a few times before, so I know that. But it's not $35 a year. It's not $35 a month. It's $35 every day.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, that's why the equivalent interest rate is 16,000%.
16,000% interest rate.
Yeah.
Now, the reason they're allowed to do this is because overdraft loans have not been forced to abide by standard lending laws. Standard lending laws say you have to show the interest rate at the and disclose it before the loan is made, right? So the person could have the option or whether or not to consent. But these overdraft fees are hidden. You don't even know they exist. Really, you think $35? It's like, oh, whatever. That's a 16,000% interest rate.
I'm going to do something that defends these banks a little bit, just in talking about the history of the overdraft fee.
Okay.
Because right now, you look at this and it's just like that's the most predatory thing ever. But actually where it came from is when people still used checks.
Yes.
And they were trying to prevent people from being embarrassed by having a check bounce when they didn't have the money that they expected to have in their account, right? And so they were like, okay, we'll just allow you to make that payment, make sure that check doesn't bounce, and then we'll charge you a fee for it so that you can pay us back, right?
Yeah.
But now that checks aren't really a thing, it is just predatory.
It's incredibly predatory. I mean, think about it this way. Every time you deposit money into a bank, you're basically loaning the bank money. The bank is going to take that money and invest it all ways to Sunday. If you put your money in a checking account, what's your interest rate? 0.01%. If you put your money in a savings account? Okay. So when you loan the bank money, the bank gives you 0.01% interest. When you ask a loan from the bank with an overdraft fee, they charge you 16,000% interest.
Yeah.
So that's the dichotomy of power that we're dealing with here. And they do it because people don't know. People have no idea, and they take advantage of our ignorance, of the working class's ignorance, and it's ridiculous. So what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is proposing is to limit that fee specifically so it's only as much as the bank needs to recoup their cost. And it's capped at $3. A $3 cap to the overdraft fee will help 23 million households and will save American consumers on average $3.5 billion. That's how much money is being saved by this overdraft fee cap.
Yeah. I heard that last year revenues for banks were $8 billion
from
overdraft fees. Yeah. It's insane.
No, it's just insane. And it's not fair that like such a...
The punishment is not fit for the crime.
And it's almost like a nickel and dime scheme where they're just trying to get you where you're weakest, right? Where you're the least knowledgeable.
Totally.
And it's just a total fraudulent fucking business model.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I overdrafted, I didn't know what was coming at all, right? My account went low and I was trying to transfer money in from another place, but maybe it took a day or two for it to transfer, and I just got hit with it. I'm like, oh, I had no idea this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's like you shouldn't like it be like a very, very clear option and to check the box on whether or not you can or can't overdraft when you open up a checking account, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So like it's just a whole fucking nightmare. And so this will likely go into effect on October 1st, 2025. I want to give a shout out to Sherrod Brown, the senator from Ohio. He is a leading Democrat on the Senate Banking Committee, and he has been lobbying for this change for years. For years, he's been fighting for this. And finally, we see some movement. Sherrod Brown is a very competitive Senate race in Ohio. So if you like this type of action, go check him out online. Now, I want to give the opposite side of this. Republicans are not happy about this. Republicans have been against the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau since its founding in the early years of the Obama administration. During Trump's time in office, he wanted to cut the CFPB by about $150 million, which is a quarter of its budget. He wanted to totally kneecap it. During his time, his appointees to the head of the CFPB dealt out punishments that were as little as $1. Because they are an executive branch, they have to enforce the law, but they get to decide what the penalty is. So they were very lenient with the penalties. So they were just totally, just in the pockets of financial interests. They just didn't care about enforcing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau rules. And House Republicans today are upset by this change. That we have one Republican lawmaker saying that the proposed rule issued today by the CFPB would undermine the Bureau's consumer protection mission. The Biden administration's attempt to mandate one-size-fits-all consumer financial products and services diminish financial institutions, limit customer choice, stifle innovation, and ultimately raise the cost of banking for all consumers. I don't see how this stifles innovation or really limits customer choices. I don't really know where he's going with that one. Maybe raising the cost of banking for all consumers is feasible because the banks are losing out on $3.5 billion in revenue. So they now have to raise some costs in other areas to capture a little bit of that $3.5 billion they're missing out on. But still, all that's doing is transferring the burden from the least the ones with the least amount of money who are overdrafting to everyone who's utilizing the services.
Yeah, I see the idea of stifling innovation because with financial service products, really, it's just what do we as the bank give you, and then what under certain conditions do you have to give us?
Yeah. So
it is restricting that bubble to a certain extent, but I do think it's a specific enough regulation that this is targeting more predatory action than actual innovation. And I also think it helps that if banks want to set up a kind of financial instrument or a different kind of account where that does kind of require interest payments at this level for specific instances of lending, they will be able to do that still, right? Yeah. They can set those up differently, and they will have to be straightforward about it.
Yep.
So I agree. I think I know where they're coming from, but to me, it sounds like they're speaking like puppets with the bank's hands up their ass.
That's exactly how it sounds. And that's what it looks like. I don't know anybody who likes paying their overdraft fee or thinks that their overdraft fee is in the right spot. Mm-hmm. If anything, I bet you it encourages innovation because the banks have been making easy money off of this overdraft fee for too long. It's been predatory, and now they'll have to think up of fun new ways to make money that will hopefully be more beneficial towards consumers. So maybe it'll increase innovation. Who knows?
I doubt it, but maybe. We're talking about banks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
We have some news about consumer sentiment rising in the United States. So the University of Michigan has a preliminary reading on the overall index of consumer sentiment this month, and it came in at 78.8. This is the highest reading since July of 2021. Let's compare this back in December. In December, it was at 69.7. And economists, for them, this came out of nowhere. It seems like economists don't know much, to be honest. I feel like they get surprised so frequently.
Yes, they are wrong about incoming data so often.
It's so always. Yeah, it makes me feel like I don't know anything. But not to shit on you guys too much. Whatever. It's just that we could do your jobs better, probably.
Of course. Yeah.
So economists only thought it was going to be 70, but we came in at 78.8, which means consumers are kind of happy with where we're at. And it's coming with this good inflation news. They also asked these consumers what they expected inflation to look like over the next 5 years, and it slipped down to 2.8 and 2.9 over the prior months. So consumers sentiment is rising because they are expecting inflation to cool even more. And this is all great news from anybody who cares about interest rates and our larger macroeconomic picture. Because these easing inflation expectations, these positive consumer sentiments, this is going to change the Federal Reserve. It's going to change their mindset. So they've indicated that in the second quarter, they're probably going to want to start cutting their rates from where they're at right now, 5.25 to 5.5%. So Fed Governor Christopher Wallace has said that this news, in combination with the positive inflation expectations, that he believes that the Federal Open Market Committee will be able to lower the target range for the federal funds rate this year. Probably second quarter, probably not first quarter. They're going to be more on the conservative side of it, but I already see fighting of economists saying that they should cut now. But I think they're going to lay more on the conservative side and wait a couple months.
Yeah, inflation that we've seen, I feel like is still, I mean, the last inflation report, core inflation was 3.9% year over year.
Yeah, something like that.
3.9. So that's not the 2% mark that they want, right? Yeah. It's definitely a sign that they could still keep rates up, but I do also see these economist sentiments that say if you don't cut sooner rather than later, then you're going to allow a recession to happen.
Yeah, or at least just not as much growth as you could have, right? It doesn't. Sure. It's not always so like, oh, if we don't do this, it's all over. It's more just like, we could have had a 2.7% GDP growth instead of 2.4. Why'd you fuck it up?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So with the consumer sentiment on the rise, it means that something is breaking through to the American public. For the first time in a long time since Biden took office, it seems like people actually have somewhat of a positive feeling about the economy. This is new for the Biden administration. This has been his toughest issue, was dealing with inflation, dealing with supply chains, And so now I ask the question, are we past the vibe session? And I want to look back to other elections where we've seen spikes in this consumer sentiment.
Okay.
In the 12 months before the 2012 election, the index rebounded from a sharp drop in the summer of 2011, and it led to Obama beating Mitt Romney. We saw a consumer confidence increase. Consumers went into the voting booth confident about their wallet, about who they were voting for president, and they were able to win. This didn't work so well for George Bush the First. George Bush the First lost his re-election campaign, and he had a higher spike in consumer sentiment similar to Obama. But Ross Perot also ran in that election and caused a whole mess. So I don't know if that's a good example. But point is, it seems like Americans are finally feeling the high GDP growth. They're feeling the inflation coming down.
Yes.
And that's going to spell a lot of good news for Biden, especially if we can get a rate cut in quarter two.
Yeah.
You might start feeling that in the beginning of quarter four.
Yeah, my take is largely this is media driven. Mm-hmm. I see it on my Twitter all the time. I'm sure you see it, right? Like kind of liberals fighting to get the message across that this is a good economy. But I'm also sure that in more mainstream outlets, it's becoming harder. I feel like they're probably just not talking about the economy in right-wing outlets as much, and left-wing outlets are talking about how good the economy actually is.
Yeah.
Because that's where the evidence is right now.
Right.
So
you go.
I just think the media environment is kind of lifting this up. And I would also point to this chart that we have on our notes page right now. And what we see in the chart is when Trump took office, first of all, when Trump was elected, just about that moment, Republican consumer sentiment crisscrossed with Democratic consumer sentiment. Democrat sentiment went down, Republican sentiment went up. For Trump's entire presidency, Republican consumer sentiment stayed sky high, while Democratic sentiment was much lower. You go further, you get to Biden taking office. Again, right when Biden is elected, they crisscross. Democratic sentiment goes above Republican. And it has stayed there since, throughout the whole way. So to me, that shows, because the economy obviously isn't changing that drastically in those periods. So what is changing drastically is just the framing of the media about the economy with regards to the president, because it's the best weapon they have against the president.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely,
I just think it's the same thing happening now.
Yeah, it's a whole media bubble, right?
Yeah.
And so now, and I call it a vibe session, because when people were getting asked, like, how do you rate the economy? Oh, it's terrible. God, Joe Biden's economy sucks. And then they're like, okay, how are your finances? My finances are pretty good. It's like I'm either getting ahead or I'm doing better.
Yeah.
Or I'm doing okay. Or I'm holding steady.
Yeah.
And so like, hold on. It's almost like that thing where the world is burning everywhere around me except my house.
Yeah, which
right?
means it's actually not burning everywhere.
Right, because if everyone feels that way, it's burning nowhere.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what was happening over the last year. Yeah. Not to say that the year when we had the inflation at 8% was okay for everybody, not saying that. But over the last couple months, when we've had wage growth outpace inflation, when we've had prices come down and core inflation come down, it's just a good economy.
Yeah, and I think it's good that we're at this point where people... So we're in election season. People are examining Biden's approval rating and how well he's doing. And in doing that, they're asking the question, okay, like New York Times, all these other outlets, they're asking the question, if the economy is doing so well, why do people dislike Biden so much? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that kind of idea has trickled down into people saying, oh, wait, the economy is doing so well. And so there's this reason to look at the economy in the political context that we're in. And I think that's just going to keep ramping up as the election gets closer and closer. Then we see a rate cut coming eventually. The stock market is probably going to keep rising in with that rate cut.
Yeah, I mean, we have the S&P and Dow Jones hitting record highs.
Exactly. So I think as far as people who are willing to actually give Biden any credit for a good economy, he looks great.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Anybody who was going to be on the fence, who could possibly give Biden a good rating on the economy, will now give him that rating.
Yeah. I don't know how you could. I mean, there are obviously still problems. There are housing prices there's
healthcare costs going through the roof in a lot of cases. Even though Biden administration has made good strides on that, he hasn't done enough.
Exactly.
The housing crisis.
Yeah. So there are still things to point out. And to those people, you just have to think about, is the alternative better?
Right.
And that's a whole discussion to have. But as far as these macro indicators, he's doing great.
Yeah. So now let's switch over to international politics. So we like to cover German politics a lot. We've actually gotten a somewhat German audience on our Instagram somehow, which is really funny. Yeah. We have like a large German audience. But I want to talk about two things regarding Germany. The current protests against the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, and the rise of a new party. So let's start with the protests that have erupted in Berlin and other cities around the AfD. So this all started because plans were released that the AfD was going to undergo a mass deportation campaign. So they created this plan in Potsdam. And what makes this notable is Potsdam is the same city where the Nazis devised their final solution in 1942. So there's a lot of deep historical connotations with this report that makes everybody very uneasy and very, very reactive and angry about the AfD, and quite frankly scared about the AfD's possible rights to power, path to power. The AfD is very upset by this. They say that their constitutional right to privacy was broken because their internal meeting was recorded and leaked to the media. But that didn't stop it from getting out. So what exactly was said? Well, Martin Sellner, the leader of the Austrian identitarian movement, proposed a master plan that would reverse the settlement of foreigners. The focus would be on asylum seekers, non-Germans with residency rights, and non-assimilated German citizens, the report said. What the fuck does non-assimilated German citizens mean, dude?
Yeah, that's scary. That's when you've entered a territory where there is no hard line anymore.
No. Non-Germans with residency rights?
Exactly.
Now there's no line. Now it's whoever they determine to be unfit.
Yeah.
Right? Now they don't have any...
Yeah, right. It's my political enemies.
Right. It's not like in the United States we have an immigration problem. We talked about this before the show, but at least with American immigration problems, it's undocumented people.
Yeah.
Here it's non-assimilated German citizens. What the fuck?
That's crazy.
So that's how insane the AfD is. And what this mirrors is a plan proposed by the Nazis in 1940 to send all the Jews to Madagascar. The Austrian identitarian movement leaders were proposing sending all these non-assimilated German citizens to a quote-unquote model state in North Africa. So this is all very, very gross, very, very far-right craziness.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking blatant segregation by ethnic identity.
Yes.
Right? Like I don't know how much more obviously bad guy you can get.
No, this is as bad as a bad guy can be.
Yeah.
And a lot of Germans know that, and we thank them for that. 1.4 million people hit the streets to show their support and to show their disgust.
It's amazing.
According to the police figures, in Berlin on Sunday, there were 100,000 people gathered in the lawns of the Reichstag. That is the Germans' lower house of parliament. Signs of the protesters were fucking awesome. They said, "Never again is now, and now we can see what we would have done in our grandparents' position." Which is really awesome. We saw the German Association of Judges came out. They said it is an attack on the Constitution and the liberal constitutional state. The legal legitimacy of such fantasies of mass deportation must be prevented by all legal and political means.
This is fantastic. Because we've talked about the AfD before, and generally the rise of populist or fascist movements. And the scary thing is when they come at you with hearts and smiles.
Yes.
When they come at you subtly, you don't see it coming. They slowly win favor by partnering with the center-right party, and then eventually they take control of the whole country. When they get exposed like this for their ruthless anti-immigrant, segregationist, like discriminatory ideals, and it's before they've taken complete control of the country, that's when people can fight back, and they come out in force to do so.
Exactly, and it's important that we get out here and expose the AfD now, because in 6 months, the voters of Germany will be going to the polls. They will be electing their representatives to the European Parliament. And crazy enough, the AfD is close to second place with the CDU. Current polling has the CDU at 32% in first place, the AfD at 23%, and the Social Democrats at 15%, Greens at 13%. SPD down at 5%, the Left Party down at 4%, almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
The FDP has seen a total collapse, but that's a whole other topic. So the ruling coalition, the Greens, the SDP, the Social Democrats, this is the ruling coalition. It's a mix of liberal, green, and socialist parties, okay? They're seeing a complete collapse of their coalition support. Just a total decimation. And a lot of AfD voters, or the AfD is gaining a lot of support. 3 years ago, the AfD was sitting at 10%. Today, they're at 23%.
This is in Germany overall. This is not just East Germany.
No, this is Germany
states.
overall.
Okay.
So, yes, good point.
Yeah.
What if we dig in? Well, in September, voters are going to the polls in 3 eastern states: Brandenburg, Saxony, and Thuringia. These are all AfD strongholds. This is where the AfD is the strongest, specifically in Thuringia. And I want you to watch Thuringia, because this is where the Nazis first took power. I want you to watch that, because that is where the far right has its longest historical allies and deepest roots. So, amidst the rise of the AfD in Germany, there is also a new political party that has sprung up over the last couple days that is now kind of wreaking havoc on the German political establishment.
So interesting.
I know. You don't normally... I've never been so tuned in to these countries where I see a new political party blossom out of nothing.
No, and it's obviously never happened in our lives or in the past, really, century in the U.S.
No.
So... It's not really on our radar.
So what is this new party? So I'm not going to try and pronounce her name because I can't, but it is, her middle name is Sarah, and she's raising the Reason and Justice Party. Okay, this Reason and Justice Party is forming out of the defeated Left Party in Germany. So I'm going to call her W because that's what her last name starts with. W was a leading figure in the Left Party, but her constituents and the people in the Left Party really didn't like her a lot. She had a lot of socially neutral positions that didn't converge with the rest of the left-wing progressive base of the Left Party. And so with her, she is coming out and creating a new party specifically to come out in favor of a left populism in rejection of left progressivism. So what does that mean by left populism? Well, it means that she is she's anti-NATO on the international stage. She is pro-Gaza. She describes Gaza as an open-air prison. She wants deglobalization. She's slightly European skeptic. She isn't totally bought into the European Union. She is an anti-green economy. She doesn't want to facilitate the green transition because she's worried of how it will affect lower income earners. She is okay with immigration restrictions. However, she does not support any type of deportations, as so far I've seen. But she also wants a lot of economic intervention. She wants increased taxes on the wealthy. She wants to shore up the pension system. She wants to do more deficit spending to boost infrastructure. So it's this weird dichotomy of, kind of Keynesian on economic stuff where you want to pump money into the economy through the federal pump, but you're also not a progressive on the social stuff as much as like gender ideology and racial issues.
Yeah. It's a good example of how kind of restricted our political system is, to show that you can have these ideas that, like, from our lens, these totally come from the two different sides of the aisle, and we're not used to reconciling them. But a party can absolutely do that if you're in a system that allows for more than two parties.
Yeah, and she explains that her main reason for doing this is because she sees the collapse in the ruling coalition in Germany. She sees the collapse of the Social Democrats, the Greens, the FDP, and she is worried about the rise of the AfD. As so far she claims, she's a politician. I don't know what her true motives are. But the point is, she is running for the purposes of kneecapping the AfD. Now, a lot of people are like, wait a second. I thought you guys were saying that the AfD was a far-right party. Why would far-right voters go and jump on a left-wing populist economically interventionist movement? Well, it's because the left populist movement rising here is neutral on these social issues that the AfD is actually energized by. The AfD doesn't have that much of an economic message. It has a cultural message. So if you give them a cultural message that is not so foot down on the pedal as the AfD, you go a little, halfway with it, and then you give economic interventionism, maybe they'll support you. And this is kind of similar to what other left-wing parties do across Europe. This is very common in, like, the Greece Communist Party is more described of a left populist party.
Okay.
The Socialist Party in the Netherlands, Netherlands has this type of, immigration restriction plus socialist economic model. So, but she's also getting some pushback because some people in the German media don't believe her. So people are saying for this party, the BSW, that's what I'm going to call it, the BSW, for the Reason and Justice Party in German, it's BSW. For the BSW, nationalism no longer seems to be the evil enemy, but a means and an end to mobilize people for her kind of socialism.
Yep.
So they are afraid, people in the German liberal progressive media are afraid that she is pushing for a national socialism, which I definitely understand their fears. I think it's a little overdone. I don't think that she is calling for the type of mass deportation campaigns that the AfD is doing. She's not doing that. She's not calling for a total, what am I saying? A total rejection of gender ideology or rejection of racial issues. It's just not the focal point of her campaign. And I think that's okay.
Yeah, and even the worst case scenario seems to not even be that bad, because her coming out and claiming that the goal is to stop the rise of the AfD means that it's going to be pretty hard for her to go back on that and at some point make a coalition with them, right?
Right.
So, like, at the very least, it seems like this goal of stopping their rise to power, it's going to almost need to be carried out.
Yes. And listen, the German left-wingers have an issue in their past of siding with Nazis. The Communist Party in Germany, the KPD, gave more credence to Hitler and the National Socialists than they should have. That is true. They're not going to make that mistake again, I hope. So it's definitely like this scary thing, but I think this is definitely lowering the stakes. If we could replace the AfD with a left-wing populist party, that is way lower stakes than dealing with an AfD that wants to deport all unassimilated German people. Okay?
Yeah.
That's a way different stakes. And so BSW claims that her goal is to stop the AfD. Is this a valid case? Well, they are going to the polls in September of 2024, only a couple months away, 8 months away. And they are going to be voting in a state like Thuringia. Thuringia is a stronghold of the AfD. It is, I think it's the state with their most support. It's either Thuringia or Saxony. And the AFD is expected to do very well. In current polling, the AFD is sitting around somewhere at 35% of the vote, with second place being the left party at around 25. So the left, while collapsed on the national stage in Germany, is very strong in this area. Why is that? Because it's an East German state. The AFD and the left party are very, very strong in the eastern parts of the country, the old Soviet bloc.
Yeah, it makes sense too, because the East Germany is the economically weakest. It's the part of the country which I would expect to be looking for more political extremism, which is what both the AFD and the left party provide.
Exactly. And so now the issue with the left party and why they've fallen out of favor in Thuringia, when they used to be such a stronghold, was because of their social progressivism. Well, the new left party, the BSW, is trying to bridge that divide. And so does it accomplish that? Well, one poll taken just a month ago said that the left party would get 27% of the vote, the AFD would get 37%, the CDU would get 16%, and then SPD 7%. Now, if the BSW were in the race, the left party would get 20.5% of the vote, the AFD drops down to 27.5%. The new left party is at 22.5%. Bigger than the current left party.
Wow.
And then if the left party and the Social Democrats and the new left, the BSW, work together and form a coalition in Thuringia, you could totally take the knees out of the AFD.
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening. This new left party, the BSW, is trying to take the knees out of the AFW and be able to give an other populist alternative to the Eastern Bloc countries that don't view that the Western-based parties of the SPD or the CDU is actively representing them.
Politically, I'm super impressed.
Yeah, I'm very impressed. This
Very
is really good.
Strategic. Right? Very smart. And it's a very outside the box move. It's not just campaigning. It's not just messaging. It's creating a whole different party. That's wild.
Now, their whole platform isn't written yet, and I want to save a lot of my praise or criticism for when the whole platform is written. They could come out with a far-right social platform, and I'll say this party isn't worth it, right? If they come out and they say that they want to increase their deportations and do all this bad stuff, then end of the day, no way.
Yeah, I would also reserve the right to judge the party. I think what we would do right now is just look at their ability to take the knees out of the AFD. And that they seem effective at.
And if that's the fight we're currently in. And so if we look at this nationally, let's go out of Thuringia. We've already proven that the BSW could kneecap the AFD in Thuringia. Let's go nationally, federally in Germany. Well, federally, the BSW could rake in 12% of the vote, taking 5 points away from the AFD and 1.5 points away from the CDU. It also pulls in a lot of independent voters as well. That's what this coalition is being made up of.
Yep.
And so it shows you that a lot of these AFD voters are people who are just looking for another way out of their current predicament.
Yes.
And they don't trust the current liberal progressive establishment, whether right or wrongly, they don't trust it. So this BSW is giving them a new thing to trust that isn't blatant xenophobia and racism.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. They're more neutral on immigration than AFD. So I feel like that's the main kind of spectrum to look at to figure out how xenophobic is this party going to come out as.
Yeah, and look, as an American, I'm going to try to map this dichotomy and this moment onto something that I can relate to, and I look at it as John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. He's a senator from Pennsylvania, recently elected, got elected as a progressive, but he's been very hard on the border crisis. He's been very hard on Joe Biden and wanting to deal with the border crisis, closing the border, increasing border security. And that's totally fine. That person can exist within the Democratic Party. And so I think it's good that this type of alternative left is coming, at least for now, as long as they don't go too far right on the cultural stuff. And we'll see if they govern, if they go into a governing coalition. The SPD, being led by Olaf Scholz, has suggested that, this woman has never governed a day in her life, that she's been a protest vote in every parliament she's been involved in, that she's never had to govern anything, and that she's a non-serious candidate. We'll see if that's true.
Yeah.
But a new political party in Germany. Crazy stuff.
Exciting.
Okay. Let's move on to Poland.
Yes.
Where we have some other amazing or interesting news.
Yeah, Poland is really interesting. So there was a new prime minister elected in Poland in October, or he took office in December. And he came into a government that was completely controlled by the far right. They're called the Law and Order Party. Meanwhile, he's a left-leaning guy. His name is Donald Tusk. Awesome name.
So funny.
And he's part of the Civic Platform is the name of the party. That is really getting louder.
It is.
What is that? Do you know?
The radiator.
And you can't turn it off.
No.
Brutal. Okay. Anyway.
What? Look at that timing.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Okay, so Tusk comes in as the prime minister. Poland has both a prime minister and a president. I looked into their government for a little bit. I still couldn't really articulate to you exactly what the differences are. But basically, the prime minister is kind of like a check on power for the president. One of the ways that Tusk started checking the far right president when he got into office is by taking the state-run TV station online.
Hell yeah.
So the far right had turned this channel into a total propaganda arm for the past 8 years. Tusk got in there and he summarily dismissed the whole board. He took it off the air immediately, and it led to protests from far right voters in defense of free speech. But he's not backing down on it, and he's actually reestablished the channel as something that's reporting more neutrally on news. Then, last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago now, Polish courts, Polish courts, they sentenced 2 members of the former government for abuse of power. Maybe they convicted them, which this sounds eerily similar to a political situation that I know about.
Right, a little bit. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But whereas here we have these debates on whether the Trump indictments are something that's good for law and order or bad for law and order. There are so many people who are in defense of Trump and who think that he is getting mistreated by the justice system, and think that these indictments are they are losing trust in the justice system because of the indictments of Trump. Meanwhile, since Tusk and the left-leaning party in Poland has convicted these former government officials, Duda, who is the far-right president of Poland, has had to initiate a process for pardoning his former employees, basically. Why this is important is because he had to acknowledge that they were actually convicted. He had been trying to fight the convictions and argue that they were unconstitutional, but now that he's initiating a pardoning process, it means he's accepting the convictions. So Tusk is getting in here. He's trying to clean out the government as much as possible. He's trying to maintain it as a democratic republic, make sure that the arms or the mechanisms of the state aren't completely consolidated within the far right bureaucracy or the far right leadership.
And I'll say this, the Law and Order Party was in power for a long time.
Yeah.
So they've entrenched their tentacles into every aspect of the government bureaucracy, specifically the court system.
Yes.
Right? They have appointed so many courts to this. And it's just making it that much harder for Tusk to do these democratic reforms. The Constitutional Tribunal, that's the equivalent to their Supreme Court, is actually led by a close friend of the leader of the Law and Justice Party. So, there is so much effort of fighting in these internal branches of government. And it's important for these fights to happen because Poland is currently being cash from the European Union is currently frozen.
Yes.
Because the European Union doesn't want to give money to Poland because of Poland's current democratic backsliding. So there's 100 million euros on the table. Not chump change, people. This is serious money that's being held away from Poland. And Tusk, trying to get that money back, is trying to go after the specific prosecutor who is in the parliament. And it's a whole issue because he's a member of, he was a prosecutor, but he ran for parliament as a prosecutor, but he hasn't given up his prosecutor powers as a member of parliament, which you're not technically allowed to do.
Yeah.
So he's trying to get him thrown out of the parliament, but he keeps getting stonewalled by the court system.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, right? Like there's so much working against him, but it is cool to see him in here, like, and really putting in the work to try to fix it, because it's kind of all on his shoulders, right?
Oh, yeah.
The far right controls the presidency, they control the parliament, so he's the only really figure of significant power that the left has in government right now. The crazy thing though is that it's kind of it seems to be at risk of creating a dual governing state in Poland, because you have the prime minister on one hand, the president on the far right on the other, and they're both going to try to enact their own reforms and block the others. So we think about our current Congress as making the United States ungovernable because of how polarized we are. But having both a prime minister and a president as dual heads of state to be this far on opposite sides means that's taken to a whole new level.
Right. And I don't know when the next presidential the Polish presidential election is. It looks like it's in 2025.
I think so. The parliament has an election coming up later in 2024.
Okay.
So that will be an opportunity for Tusk's party to try to retake some control.
Got it.
We'll have to see how it goes.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now let's go back to United States politics. This is a really, really interesting court case. So the Supreme Court has sided with the Biden administration in regards to his border enforcement policy. So since 2021, Governor Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, has mounted a multi-billion-dollar campaign to impose stringent measures at the border in order to deter migrants. This includes erecting barricades, barbed wire, floating buoys in the Rio Grande that like cut you if you touch it, and it just insane stuff. And this is arguably, well, I would say definitely against federal law. These federal agents who go down, who are supposed to patrol the border, have seen these pieces of barbed wire and have seen the effects of people getting caught on it, people actually drowning because of it, people not being able to get up into the up to the other side of the Rio Grande and then drowning in the river. This is happening because of these draconian border policies. So the Biden administration would come down with border agents and they would cut the barbed wire, move it, it would be in their way, all this other stuff. And the Abbott government was extremely frustrated. They said the absence of razor wire and other deterrent strategies encourages migrants to make unsafe and illegal crossings between ports of entry. I think that's absolutely untrue. If anything, this only increases the mortality rate.
Yeah.
Right? There's no evidence to suggest that less barbed wire means less death. Okay? All we've seen is an increase in death because of these actions.
And think of the stories of these people who are getting to the border, right? They're coming from countries south of Mexico, sometimes across the Atlantic Ocean, and they're often paying smugglers to get them all the way through Mexico to get up to the American border. Once you've made a journey, like, first of all, are you really going to know what's waiting for you once you get there? Aren't you more just thinking, I need to get into the country as fast as I can? And then once you get there, once you put all of that effort, invest all of that time into making it through most of Central America, if not all of it, is barbed wire, despite how scary it is, really going to stop you from trying to reach your destination? Of course not.
Of course not. So the Biden administration took Abbott to court. They went to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals first. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is the most conservative court of appeals in the country. It encompasses Texas, Louisiana, I think Oklahoma, and then one other southern state. This panel prohibited the federal agents from damaging, destroying, or interfering with Texas barbed wire and Texas border policy. The only way that they were allowed to do it was in the case of immediate emergency for serious bodily injury or death. I think this is very similar to the Republican abortion bills, making it exceptions for women who have danger to their lives.
Yeah.
At what point, at what probability is it a danger to your life? Are we talking 50%, 70%, 100%?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like here these people are talking about a 100% serious death scenario. Child is literally caught in the barbed wire in that moment, bleeding out. You can go get them.
Yes, and otherwise, if you're wrong about your judgment, you risk being convicted and sent to jail.
Yes. So Ken Paxton, he is the Attorney General of Texas, sued the Biden administration and took it all the way up to the Supreme Court for this, okay? And the Biden administration appealed it all the way up to the Supreme Court, so here we are. Ken Paxton says that it is in the public interest to reduce the flow of deadly fentanyl and combat human trafficking. Well, guess what, Ken Paxton? We know that the majority of fentanyl coming into this country comes through the legal ports of entry. Mm-hmm. Not only that, it also comes smuggled by U.S. citizens.
Yeah.
U.S. citizens are the ones smuggling fentanyl into the country through ports of entry with legal passports. That's how they're doing it. And we know that information. Yeah. It's not secret knowledge.
No, illegal immigration is not the cause of the fentanyl crisis. As convenient as that is for anti-immigrant messaging, It's just not true. And we have to keep pounding that message
sorry
through.
To disappoint you, all of you guys who just want to keep the amount of brown people coming into the country at a minimum. It's just not the case that you can put fentanyl as the reason why.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court actually sided with the Biden administration. Justice Barrett and Justice Roberts were the two conservatives who sided with the liberals to form the 5-4 majority. Now, people are online and in the news saying, Supreme Court sides with Biden. Supreme Court makes liberal turn. Wait a second. I have a totally different reading of this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Are we saying that 4 of the Supreme Court justices no longer think that the federal government is the one who controls border policy? We're going back hundreds of years of precedent and we're rolling all that back?
Yeah.
That's what we're saying here?
It's frustrating because the court didn't give any explanation of the justices' decisions.
No, there was no explanation no explanation for the dissent. It was just a ruling.
Yeah, I mean I can see arguments, right? It's Texas's land, right? It's the state's land, but I think the better argument is the jurisdiction that the federal government has over immigration generally, because that's clearly what we're dealing with here.
Yes. So as per Title 8 of the United States Code, it directly empowers federal agencies to control who enters and leaves the country, enforce immigration laws at the borders, and take appropriate action against those who violate those laws. That is Title 8 of the United States Code. Now, these 4 justices are saying that Texas's laws about putting barbed wire and guarding their borders supersedes the United States Code. It does not do that. I don't know where they're coming from. I wish I got more explanation for their dissent so I could read why they said this.
Yeah.
Another argument, we have statute authority, not just U.S. code authority, but statute authority from the federal government in the Immigration and Nationality Act. This gives multiple agencies the authority to control the border. This includes ICE. This includes the Department of Homeland Security. All of these things are delegated the authority to control the border by the INA.
So this ruling from the Supreme Court, it's actually a temporary order that's preventing Ken Paxton and Texas law enforcement from blocking federal agents and federal enforcement from accessing or dismantling these barriers that they've put up at the border. There's actually an appeal that's going up right now that's kind of based on a different case from a Fifth Circuit ruling in Texas that ordered them to remove the floating barriers on the Rio Grande. So this is the ability for Texas to put these barriers there at all is still in question and still making its way through the courts. What this is doing is just answering the question of, in the meantime, like right now, is federal law enforcement able to deal with or to dismantle the barriers that Texas has up? And the Supreme Court has said yes so far.
And I need to see the dissent here because, like, I can't understand how the Supreme Court justices are making the determination that they're just upending immigration policy and saying states can decide their own immigration policy now after hundreds of years of that not being the case.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. I mean, I suppose they can have some perspective of like the states have maybe some far-fetched. The states have the ability to almost defend their territory or to, like, they can make some argument that immigration is hurting their citizens.
Sure.
But it is far-fetched. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to believe that unbiased judges would agree with that. So I guess we'll see if there's a better argument that we're not thinking about right now, and whether the judges or justices that gets to are unbiased.
Either way, good thing for Biden and good thing for immigrant rights.
Yeah, good for now.
Good for now.
We'll take it.
Okay. Now let's go back to foreign policy here. We have very interesting economic data coming out of China.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different things telling a lot of different stories, and trying to wrap your head around it is just absolutely insane. So the main question I want to ask is China's growth real? Mm-hmm. China reported 5.2% GDP growth in 2023, but these numbers are just honestly very hard to believe given other economic indicators coming out of the country. Experts indicate that China's GDP numbers should be looked at more as an input instead of an end measurement. This is because China's central government imposes GDP targets. So at the beginning of the year, Chinese central government says, we want to hit a 5% GDP target. Mm-hmm. So all of these local governments are now incentivized to fudge the numbers, to spend more money on non-productive infrastructure just to get to that 5% number. Mm-hmm. Well, it's very hard to believe that the 5.2% GDP number was genuinely hit when we see this variety of economic data. So firstly, the CPI dropped 0.5% in November on an annual basis. This is the biggest fall since the depths of the pandemic 3 years ago. So we talk about China being in a deflationary spiral. It's only getting worse. Now, why is deflation bad? Well, deflation is bad is because it's indicating a lack of consumption. And we see a decrease in Chinese local consumption. And we see a decrease in Chinese foreign consumption. Mm-hmm. China is selling less abroad. There's more goods in their country. And they're not able to sell those goods in their country for the same prices. That means profit margins are going down. That means companies aren't growing as fast, which means they can't invest as much, which means wages can't go up, which means how the cost of living is impacted. So there's a whole host of issues with deflation, just as there's issues with inflation. Right?
Yes.
So now there is currently an excess in savings. People think, oh, an excess in savings. That's a very good thing. Well, actually, not really, because this is playing into the demographic issue that China has. So what that means is that the excess savings is held by retirees. Retirees have their money saved in these pools, right? Long-term investment accounts. And that means capital is very, very cheap. It's very, very cheap to take out and borrow money because there's so much money invested in the system and banked in the system. Well, this also comes at a time when the youth unemployment rate is extremely high, which means that the highest consuming years of people's lives are being wasted because they don't have the disposable income to go out and spend the capital that they don't have.
Yeah, the people who are hoarding their savings, this is also tied into China's real estate crisis because people have been encouraged year after year to invest their money in new apartments, new housing. And now none of that housing has gotten built because all of the developers have just taken it and kind of used it on new projects like a Ponzi scheme to build up the skeletons of these buildings that now no one will ever live in because all of the major developers in China are defaulting on their debts. So people have, after saving and investing in what the government encouraged them to invest in for years, those investments are largely going to go by the wayside. And the response of people when that happens is like, okay, I trust that much less that my money will actually do good work for me in the economy. I just need to sit on it. I need to make sure if something goes really badly that I have enough to protect myself.
And I'm so glad you said that because that plays perfectly into what just happened on the Chinese stock market. So the Chinese stock market just lost $6.3 trillion in value.
Wow.
that is a massive decimation of the Chinese capital markets. It's so bad that China is thinking of passing a rescue package. So Chinese policymakers are seeking to mobilize $278 billion from offshore accounts of Chinese state-owned enterprises.
Wow.
Trying to and then buy shares into their stock exchange.
Wow.
So they are attacking the treasuries of state-owned enterprises to go and shore up the private stock market. That's what's happening.
That sounds like communism to me, right?
I think it's the opposite.
Really?
I can't think of a thing that's less communist. A state-owned unless they're voting shares.
Oh, okay. So you're saying government. I guess I'm thinking about it as communist because it's just like the government takes whatever chunks of money they need to from the state-owned enterprises.
I'm saying it's
for their own.
I'm saying it's the most state capitalist thing because there are state-owned enterprises that are now having to lose some of their money to go prop up failing private businesses.
Oh, is that okay?
That's what's happening. They're buying the collapsing shares of private companies through public entities.
Okay.
Whether or not this means public entities are going to be taking over these private companies through these buyings of shares, I do not know.
Okay, my understanding was that it's going to fund consumers paying into the stock market.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. Not doing that.
Okay.
It's almost like it's kind of similar to the United States doing like a TARP loan during the financial crisis of giving low interest loans to these companies to buy their own shares or something like that.
I guess a way to still look at it as communist though is that like will it be government ownership? It'll be government ownership of some percentage of these companies.
Well, I don't know that. I don't know if it's voting shares or not. The United States put a lot of money into our stock market to shore it up in 2008, but they weren't voting shares.
Okay.
So that's not communist.
Sure.
So I don't know if there's no control. If there is voting shares, like the British did during the wake of the financial crisis, the United Kingdom bought collapsing shares of banks and then put government regulators on the corporate boards to oversee the transition into a post-2008 banking system.
Okay,
that's pretty communist, but that was the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
So,
and even that is still very limited communism.
Yeah.
I just like how it's crazy to me that the private market in China is even this big still.
Yep.
Right? Yep. Like that not everything is this tied into the state.
Nope. No. Oh, and that 6.3 trillion is a collapse of the yen. That's not the dollar figure. So
okay. So that's more like 1 trillion.
Whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know the conversion, but that's not I don't think it's 6.3 trillion dollars. I think it's 6.3 trillion yen. Just check me on that.
Yeah.
On your phone you're watching this on right now.
Yeah.
So, but now, here we go. Positive news for China. China is producing more. Their increase in industrial production was 6.8% over last year, but clearly that isn't enough to drive consumer sentiment back up. It isn't enough to drive growing. It's not enough to break past the deflationary pressures, right? So China was all out at Davos this year. They were trying to convince the international market that, oh man, we are the best. We are the country to invest in. Mm-hmm. Give us your money. Come home to Papa. China's not going anywhere. But with this economic data, it's hard to believe that that's true. So the Rodian Group did a really interesting study trying to answer this question of what is the true Chinese GDP figures. So it breaks down each individual GDP component. So for 2003, the official numbers for investment was 1.6% of GDP growth. The Rodian Group estimates that it's 0%. Not 1.6%. Why do they think this? Well, through November, China invested $2 trillion less in their real estate sector than it did in the same period in 2022. That is a drop of equivalent to 1.6 of China's GDP.
Wow.
All things equal, some other investment activity would have to fill that hole just to avoid negative growth in investment this year, let alone paint a positive picture.
Yeah, that is really hard to believe.
Right. So that's their first evidence. Okay, that's number one. Investment should be 0%, not 1.6, because of the collapse of the real estate investment market, right? They also saw private sector investment down 0.5% from last year. They did see infrastructure investment rise by 5.8% so far this year, but has slowed late in the year amidst broader constraints on local governments due to high debt levels. So the last time investment made a similar contribution in 2019, this is important. So in 2019, investment added 1.7% of GDP. The question is whether 2003 investment growth is remotely similar to what we see today. The answer is simply no. It's just no.
Okay.
It's not. So they're assuming it's 0. That's their estimate.
Wow.
2023, government spending. The official number is 1.3%. They estimate 0%. The decline is in structural revenues over the last, as a share of GDP, peaked in 2015 at 22.1% and fell to 16.8% last year. So what they're saying is government revenues is decreasing rapidly, right? We have less and less money going into the Chinese coffers. Well, wow. And in addition to this, local governments have seen a decrease in revenues as property values have collapsed.
Yeah.
So because property values are collapsing, now these local governments are taking in less money. And because of all of this, half of cities were spending 10% of their annual budgets just on interest payments, just to service their debts.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's a lot.
So now, when accounting for all of these expenditures just on debt, China's best case scenario, they estimate, is a 0% contribution to government spending. Because all that money that's being spent on interest payments, that's not going into government spending GDP figures, right? That's going on to service your debt.
Yeah.
Now, next step, consumption. The official number is 3%. The Rodian Group estimates 2%. Many thought that the cash that Chinese citizens had been sitting on during the pandemic would be unlocked at this time, but as we discussed, that's not truly the case. The rise in these household deposits did not reflect significant growth in actual savings, but rather households shifting away from risky wealth management products to safer but locked-in time deposit accounts. These are like retirement funds.
Okay.
So they're shifting away from the volatile stock market, and they're going to more maybe bond-heavy mutual funds.
So it's like these are transfers rather than additional investment into the economy, and they're just mismeasuring that.
Yes, and another way they're seeing or estimating that consumption isn't as high as they say it is because credit card loans are much lower than what they were over the last few years.
Credit card interest rates?
No, credit card loans. Scroll down a little bit.
Okay.
You could see the credit card loans, the annual change in mortgage and credit card loans that are outstanding. Because there's a less amount of credit card loans outstanding, that means they can't be spending as much as they were in the years prior. There's no way that makes sense.
The money just isn't out there, especially when you combine that with the fact that they've been saving so much more.
That's exactly right. If they were saving so much, right, that's exactly right.
Where else is this money coming from? The wages aren't increasing that much, right? You have massive youth unemployment.
It's not happening.
No.
So then the last and final piece, which is the most obvious that I'm not going to give a long explanation for because you can go watch our 8 other videos explaining it, is net exports. The official number is negative 0.7. Rodian Group is actually kind of nice to them. They give them negative 0.5.
Okay.
They're like, all right, maybe your net exports aren't as bad as you say they are. So
interesting.
For some, I don't know. I honestly, it was above my head. But the point is, the consensus is that true Chinese growth is around 1.5%, not at the 5.2% that we're currently at.
Well, that's not consensus. That's the Rodian Group.
That's the Rodian Group's estimate.
Okay. I read another article this week, actually, from the Financial Times, where, what are they called? Where another group estimated them to be maybe around 3.6%.
Okay.
TS Lombard. So I'm with you, and they use a bunch of other methods to estimate that, like production of steel, consumption of electricity, energy imports.
Yeah, the PMI index would be a fine one to look at too. We talked about the Purchasing Managers Index, how much people are purchasing for their input products is down.
But even that is concerning because that is published by the government, right? And so they're trying their best to look at data that comes from other sources. And so I'm with you. The Chinese government, they have every incentive to produce numbers that are higher than you would expect to project strength, and every internal mechanism in the way that they incentivize GDP growth at the local and the state level to have those numbers totally inflated as well.
Yep.
So it doesn't 5.2 when I first heard it. It didn't make sense at all, right? They have far too many structural economic problems. They are investing. I mean, they're heavily invested in infrastructure. They are still. I will give them credit where credit is due because they're the clear dominant producer of what are now extremely important technologies in solar cells, and
transformers, steel,
in
electrical
EVs,
steel.
And electrical vehicles,
right.
So they are going to get a lot of input from that or income from that. But they are also dealing with protectionism from all of these Western markets that they've relied on so heavily for so long, including to export those types of goods, right? Like China is getting to the point where their EV market is actually so strong that they're facing saturation on the local front. So they've been relying on European imports of their cars, and Europe is starting to sour on them. Europe is worried about being too dependent on China, just like the US is. So even though there are areas where China is strong, like their weak domestic consumption means that 5.2% growth does seem a little absurd.
No, listen, their weak domestic consumption will kill them.
Yes.
It will kill them.
Totally.
They need to fix their youth unemployment thing. And their youth unemployment problem is getting worse because they're just sending the people back for more schooling.
Yeah.
And it's just going to cause a snowball effect.
Yeah, they don't have the jobs for the young people who have expected to work in cushy service economy jobs.
Yep.
Right? They don't have the infrastructure built out for that. So it's not going to work.
And now Chinese expectations for GDP growth are already sitting at like 4.5% or something like that.
For 24?
Yeah, for 2024, which we'll see if they can make it.
I mean, I'm sure they'll say they made it.
And then they probably won't.
Yeah.
Deep dive time, everybody.
Yes.
So we are currently in the midst of a blossoming U.S. involvement in the Middle East, which could rival a lot of our other Middle East adventures right now.
You think so?
Possibly.
Okay.
We are currently dealing with the Houthis in Yemen. So brief background of what they're doing right now, so we're all on the same page. The Houthis have been at war in a civil war with the central government of Yemen for a long time, for like over a decade now. The standard government of Yemen is backed by Saudi Arabia, which was backed by the United States and Great Britain. So these Houthi rebels have been fighting for a long time. When the Israelis invaded Gaza after the attacks on October 7th, the Houthis wanted to show their support for Gaza and started bombing Israeli positions and sending missiles into Israel. They were being shot down by U.S. ships in the Red Sea. And now the Houthis are taking it upon themselves to blockade all international travel coming through the Suez Canal. They are forcing ships to go around the Cape of New Hope, around the Horn of Africa, and just causing a big bottleneck in global trade, increasing prices for European and American consumers to import products from India, China, and all the rest. So this is a huge international problem. Oh, and it's not just a imperial core problem of Europe and America. There are African nations that are suffering due to the backlog of goods coming in through the Suez Canal. Many African nations, Egypt has expressed dissatisfaction with what the Houthis are doing. Many African nations.
It's the whole world. It's not just Africa. It's East Asian countries too. China is one of them.
Yep.
Where they're relying on imports and exports to go through there, and smaller businesses in China are going bankrupt because of it.
Exactly. So this is not just an imperial core problem. So it was important for us to kind of learn the background of the Houthis, who they are, where they came from, why are they fighting the way that they're fighting who they're fighting for how long they've been fighting. We're trying to answer those questions with the historical context. So we want to give a brief rundown of the history of the Houthis and their movement, the history of Yemen, the modern history of Yemen. And we're going to start pretty far back. We're going to start in 1517. But nice. we'll get to 19th century pretty quick.
Yeah.
So Egypt under the Mamelukes captured Yemen in 1517. In 1538, the Ottomans seized Yemen from the Mamelukes, and the Ottomans then incorporated the Mameluke Empire into the Greater Ottoman Empire. So Egypt and the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, merged into one Islamic Ottoman Caliphate. So then the Ottomans became the rulers of Yemen. However, they failed to fully conquer the Yemeni people in the mountains of northern Yemen. And this is going to be very important because in these northern mountains of Yemen lives a Shia sect of Islam, specifically the Zaydi branch. And Zaydi, specifically the Zaydi branch. Now, what is Zaydiism? Because this is very important for us to understand if we are to understand who the Houthis are. This is a very unique type of Islam. They emerged in the 8th century following Zayd ibn Ali, and he led a rebellion against the Umayyad Caliphate. And the Umayyad Caliphate was the large Islamic empire that spanned the world, taking on jihad and invading Europe and all the rest. Now, what was it again? The Zaydis?
Zaydis.
The Zaydis believed Zayd ibn Ali was the rightful successor to the imamate, the leader of the Muslim religion, because he led a rebellion against this Umayyad Caliphate, which he believed was tyrannical and corrupt. And this notion of going against corruption and tyranny is very, very baked in to Zaydism.
Yeah. There also, I'll note that the Umayyads were Sunni, and the Zaydis are a sect of Shia Islam.
Yes.
Right? Which goes back to a decision over who would have been the rightful
Heir to Muhammad,
yes, and who should have led. It's kind of where it's the main cleavage in Islam. It's caused a ton of conflict so far, continues to do so.
Yes. So the imam at the time when all of this was going on, Muhammad al-Bakir, did not engage in political action and against the Ottomans after they took over. And the followers of Zayd believed that a true imam must fight the corrupt rulers and must fight back against the Ottoman oppressors. So this starts a revolt and For hundreds of years, these revolts have been popping and flaring and popping and flaring. I want to skip us to 1849. So the Ottoman Empire reasserts their control very strongly in 1849, where they invaded the region and made a deal with the ruling imam. I'm not going to go through all their names because I'm not going to pronounce them right, and I don't want to do all that. So the ruling imam at the time in 1849 was approached with a deal by the Ottomans. They made the offer that this imam would rule the highlands, but allow a small Ottoman garrison to stay nearby. And then in addition, revenues from his land would be divided with the Ottomans. So the Ottomans are getting like a protectorate, right? They're making this northern Yemenis enclave, giving it some authority, giving it some autonomy, but also reaping the benefits of the land and maintaining their control for their international prestige and all the rest. Well, he would also get a monthly salary directly from the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire. Well, this imam was denounced as treacherous by the rebels, by the Zaydis. Zaydis. By the Zaydis.
I think.
All right, we'll just go with Zaydis.
Yeah.
He was denounced as a rebel. He was denounced as treacherous for his consent of the presence of the Ottoman forces. So this led to 2 long decades of imams fighting for power in this northern Yemenis region. So, listen, guys, we're in 1849. We're already talking about a 2-decade civil war in the northern area. This is not new. This is caked in.
180 years ago.
Yes, this is not new to the region. And the fact that we're talking about the attacking against corrupt rulers, and that's baked in to the Zaydi religion. First of all, I think it's very interesting that a religion is so focused around anti-corruption in their governing forces. I think that's actually very noble.
Really?
Yeah, for a religion to be that concerned with their civic organization. I mean, Islam is a very civically organized religion, right?
I'm skeptical about the authenticity of that.
That's fine.
I see a religion resorting to claims of corruption as kind of a mode of gaining power.
Sure.
I see like cries of corruption. I mean, they can be right, but I would often liken them to cries about immigration, right? Or just the kind of the easy targeting the people in power, saying they're doing this wrong. They're not in it for you at all. They're just in it for themselves.
I understand.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a means of control, possibly.
Yeah. To me it infringes upon the purity that I would expect religion to come with. Kind of.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So with these 2 decades of fighting in this region, the Ottomans are going to exploit this. So in 1872, they come back. They use this dysfunction and they reassert their dominance over the region. This again leads to pop-ups of revolts and But the large revolt that is most notable comes in 1891. So the apparent justification for the uprising, led by this imam, was due to the malpractice of Ottoman officials coupled with their irreligious modes of conduct. So at this point, the Ottomans were going through a somewhat of a period of modernization. They were trying to become more of a European power. They were trying to have more civic laws. Well, The Houthis don't want civic laws. They want Islamic laws. They don't want to have to follow Ottoman law. They want to follow their laws. So leaders turned not just to the expulsion of the Ottomans, but they also went after the British. And the British have been controlling southern Yemen since the 1840s. Now, centered around Aden. Why were the British controlling southern Yemen? Well, it's because they wanted to protect their shipping lanes coming from India, which is just so fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Because the British got into Yemen for the purposes of controlling shipping lanes coming from Asia.
Yeah.
Why is the United States and Britain bombing Yemen today? To control the shipping lanes for the stuff coming in from India and Asia. It's like geography is destiny, dude.
History does repeat itself.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
So these revolts in 1891 go on for a long time, but notable progress was made in 1905 when the rebels finally captured the Ottoman positions in Sansa. This is the current day capital of Yemen. So Ottomans returned after failed peace talks. They took on July 16th, 1905, this is a big day in Yemen history, the Ottomans marched on Sansa with 6 battalions of Albanian troops. And on the 29th of August, 1905, they retook the capital city. The leading imam was furious because this all happened during a truce with the Ottomans. They were currently in a period of truce while this peace was getting brokered out. The Ottomans broke that. And they were extremely frustrated because when the rebels first took Sansa, they let the Ottoman soldiers leave peacefully. They didn't attack them as the Ottomans were retreating. They let them go. Yemenis forces actually protected the Ottoman retreat from Houthi extremists who wanted to attack the Ottomans as they ran out of the country. Ottomans did not respect that truce. So this put another huge damper in any type of peace negotiation. The Yemenis thought with the rise of the Young Turks in 1908 that this would be beneficial for them. The Yemenis people petitioned for more schools to be built in their area, for greater investment with lightened police presence, etc., but the Ottomans were not willing to give it. In 1911, a fresh revolt came due to corruption of government officials. We've heard the story a billion times by now. Leaders in the Zaidi agricultural sector, though, refused because they thought the revolt was doomed, and they were sick of the fighting. They were sick of losing their access to international markets. They were sick of having to feed this army. They were tired of it. They were done. So this finally leads to the Treaty of Dawn. And in this treaty, the leading imam agreed to renounce his claim to the caliphate and stop questioning the Ottomans' control of that, to drop the title of Commander of the Faithful, which is what Houthi means, assumed by his predecessors and himself, and to style himself simply as the Imam of the Zay, not the Imam of Islam generally. So the Imam also agreed to liberate all Ottoman prisoners and to renounce his right to collect taxes within areas under the Ottoman jurisdiction. So he's really ceding a lot of power to the Ottomans. But the Imam was given the right to enforce all Islamic law. He did not have to enforce Ottoman civic law in northern Yemen. Southern Yemen, though, was still controlled around Aden and would remain under British India's control.
Okay.
Yes, so Britain is still there. All that's happened now is northern Yemen is being controlled autonomously by this Yemenese imam, this Zaidism imam, under the central government of the Ottomans. But the British are still there. The British are still there on the southern port, specifically to protect their shipping lanes. And then this now shifts into the next period of Yemenis history, titled Independence and Separation. Okay? Do you have anything to add up here, or should I go forward?
Go for it.
Okay. So this is the period of independence and separation. As we all know, after World War I, the Ottoman Empire was defeated. And after this, the imams in the north proclaimed that they would create their own country, the Kingdom of Yemen. They joined the Arab League in 1945, so it's now an independent country. But in this point, in 1945, and as the country goes further and further into modernity, there becomes a split between the royals and the nationalists. Who should rule? The king, the imam, or the nationalists? Well, in 1962, the Egyptians backed a revolutionary military cabal to overthrow the king and establish an Arab nationalist government in the age of pan-Arabism. Think about what else is going on in 1962.
I'm going to add something here. So you're calling them nationalists. I read that they're Republicans. They want a republic.
That's fine.
Right?
Nationalist, Republican, same thing.
As compared to the kings or the royalty, which is also supported by the Saudis.
Yes.
And that's important, right?
That's
because
very important.
The Saudis are a royal government themselves.
Yes. So the Zaidi royalists fled to the mountains along the Saudi border and were fighting a civil war for control of the country. And the Saudi Arabia actually supported the royalists against Egypt because this is a part of a longer, bigger Saudi-Egyptian, proxy war going on. And Israel actually ended up backing the Zaidi royalists as well at this time. So Israel was actually giving money to the Zaidi royalists because the Zaidi royalists were fighting Egypt, and Egypt under Nasser was leading the main attacks against Israel at the time. So it's this whole chain of crazy political and
connections.
It's nuts. But at the end, the nationalists or the Republicans ended up becoming victorious. And this was mainly because the Saudis and the Egyptians basically lost will to fight after the 1967 war with Israel. After the 1967 war with Israel, Saudi Arabia and Egypt's like, all right, fuck it. I don't care anymore. Whatever. Do whatever you want. So the Republicans and the nationalists now control the northern Yemen people. Okay?
Only the northern?
Only the northern.
Okay.
Not the southern. In the south, Nasser's Arab nationalist government caught fire too. But right now, that's what was going on in the north. Okay? Now, 1963, the fighting that was going on in northern Yemen started to bleed into the south. It started to bleed there. That wasn't the point of it, okay? It wasn't the goal, but it was happening. British-led Saudi-financed guerrillas in the Yemen Arab Republic spread to South Arabia, okay, and formed the National Liberation Front. The National Liberation Front had the explicit goal to force the British out of southern Arabia.
Okay.
The NLF was a Marxist revolutionary group, so it was sided a lot by the Soviet Union.
Yes.
The Soviet Union is now using the NLF to get at the British. Right?
So we're starting to bleed out further out of religion and into politics, economics.
Yes, exactly. This is no longer becoming a religious struggle. It's really becoming a very political and civic struggle.
Yes.
Above anything else. So the protests and the violence were too much to handle. Okay. And so the British left. They were done with it. And with the closure of the Suez Canal in 1967 during the Israeli war, Britain said that they had no reason to be stationed there anymore. They were done. They left. And so southern Yemen became independent as the People's Republic of South Yemen. The NLF, with support of the army, attained total control of the new state. So now we have the Yemenese Republic at the top, the Yemen Arab Republic, okay? And then we have the People's Republic of South Yemen. Both of these people want to unite Yemen under its own gauge, okay? But obviously, both of them want their control. Both of them want to be the people, to be the proper and rightful heirs and controllers of Yemen. So, after fighting and civil war and all this eventual things, 1972, we have a unification decree. Doesn't mean that it happened yet, but just like they're declaring that they want to do it eventually, okay? But then, fighting erupts again between North Yemen and South Yemen in October of 1972. Northern Yemen was supplied by Saudi Arabia, which is so funny. Keep that in mind. Northern Yemen was supplied by Saudi Arabia. Remember that. South Yemen was supplied by the USSR. Fighting was short-lived and led to the Cairo Agreement of October 28, 1972, which put forward a path to unify the two countries. There was again another war in 1979 as the NFL was doing some shady business, funding democratic movements in the north and shipped guns and guerrillas into the mountains to go and fight the northern government. But then the South had a civil war too, but I can't get into all that. But the point is, they finally unified. In November of 1989, the leaders of the Yemen Arab Republic and the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen agreed on a draft unity constitution originally drawn up in 1981. And so now, efforts towards unification proceeded. All this time, on May 22nd, 1990, the Republic of Yemen's independence was finally declared.
Huge.
Yeah,
and I feel like the important part here is the man who now was leading this unified Yemen. His name was General Abi Abdullah Saleh.
He is a very important figure.
Yes, extremely important. He started ruling in 1978. Do you know whether he started as the ruler of the North or the South? Because I don't.
North.
I don't have that. Okay. So, yeah, because he is one of the Zaydis, right? So he he takes over, and when Yemen unifies, it is controlled by a Zaidi leader, and he ends up being president all the way until 2011,
like 30 years,
way down the line. But before he leaves office, already another group uprises underneath him.
Yes,
and this is a group that they happen to also be Zaidi, but just like the Zaidis used to say, they think Saleh is the corrupt one.
Yes, and I want to say these new rebels were heavily radicalized by the 2003 invasion of Iraq.
Yes.
The invasion of Iraq was a huge point in the radicalization of these Zaidis.
Yes.
Right? This is when the Houthis adopted the slogan, God is great, death to the USA, death to Israel, curse the Jews, and victory for Islam.
We hadn't mentioned yet that these rebels were the Houthis.
Oh.
But yes.
Oh, there you go.
The new group that rose up, right, against the corruption of another Zaidi, the group that initially risen up in resistance to corruption,
who originally risen up to resist from corruption.
Yeah.
Originally. Like,
exactly.
So it's years.
It's the Houthis. They come out of this, and yeah, at first they were a very much non-radical group. They like got their start by putting on these kids camps and trying to revive Zaydism, kind of in the youth of the country, and then the invasion of Iraq happened. Mm-hmm. They became radicalized. They were upset because who supported Saleh? I'm trying to wonder.
I have that here. Hold
was
on.
there a connection between their hatred of the West and their uprising against Saleh, or were those independent things?
So Saleh was originally backed by the Saudis, which is backed by the United States. Originally.
Yes.
So in the first breakout, right, the Yemenis army and air force was suppressing rebels in the far north.
The Houthis.
Yes, the Houthis.
Yes,
right?
they were suppressing
Saleh's
the Houthis.
government. Saleh's government was suppressing the Houthis with air bombardments, all being funded by Saudi Arabia.
Yep.
Saudi Arabia being an ally of the United States at the time. Mm-hmm. And what's crazy was the Houthis kept winning.
Yeah.
Houthis kept kicking their ass, dude.
Yeah.
Houthis bested them again and again and again.
Yeah, and in 2004, Saleh and the Yemeni military killed Hussein al-Houthi, who was the leader of the Houthis and who they're named after, which obviously another huge martyring situation.
Yep, of
right?
course.
More echoes of history.
Right, that's like a News 80.
Exactly.
Right? That's like they're not going to say that, but whatever. Like that's like their cultural feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So then the Saudis back Saleh. Meanwhile, Iran and Hezbollah start to get close to the Houthis because they're trying to counter Iran. They're using it as a proxy war, and the fighting just continues. It starts in 2003, 2004, and it continues, and then in 2011,
the Arab Spring.
Yeah,
that's when it really explodes. We have these protests popping up all over the Arab world following the Tunisian Revolution. Tunisian. Jesus. They occurred simultaneously with the Egyptian Revolution and other mass protests all over the Arab world, right? And originally these protests were against unemployment, economic conditions, corruption, all things that Houthis normally rebel against.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, and Zaydis.
Now the same thing?
Yeah, kind of, right?
Right? So what happens is they totally revolt against Saleh. And Saleh was replaced by a Sunni from the south, Hadi. And Hadi has been Saleh's vice president at the behest of the Saudis for a long time. So that was like the grand bargain Saleh was making with Saudi Arabia. Was like, you prop up my regime, I'll make sure my second in command is a Sunni. And to be clear, Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Iran is Shia, just so we all understand. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the Houthi were furious at this, that Hadi was now made the president.
Because he's Sunni and they're Shia.
Exactly. Yeah. So a national dialogue was instituted to address further the future of Yemen and Saleh with regional international assistance and all this stuff. Originally, there was a proposal to make like 6 different provinces, but the Houthis totally rejected this because they thought it gerrymandered away the power of the Zaidi-dominated north. Mm-hmm. So this whole process... but then the craziest switcheroo I've ever seen in my entire life happens, where the Houthis aligned with Saleh, and then Saleh was like, no, you know what? Fuck Saudi Arabia, Fuck the people who kept me in power for like a decade.
Yeah.
Let's go kill them.
Well, as soon as he was out of power, no loyalty to them anymore. No reason to be.
Done.
Right?
So Saleh now joins the Houthis. And Saleh used his power with like his clout with the military and all that to now fight against the Saudi-backed Houthi.
Yeah. And they take the capital in like months.
Yep. January 2015, Sana'a is captured.
Yep.
Iran, credit to Iran, I guess, actually discouraged them from doing this. Iran was like, please don't take the capital.
Yeah, they thought it was too extreme. They wanted something that was less radical as far as actually marching on it. But then, like, this goes to show how limited the imperial powers control over the quote-unquote colonial or like the proxy power is, because the Houthi leadership was just drunk on power. They're like, oh my God, we just marched on the capital and took the country. This is insane.
Yeah.
We're awesome. And so they just perpetuated the war, right? Because they wanted everything.
So then after they take the capital, Saudi Arabia said, this isn't fucking funny anymore. Saudi Arabia decides this enough's enough.
Yep.
They launch Operation Decisive Storm. Begins March 2015. This resulted in one of the largest humanitarian crises in the 21st century. We're talking millions of people endangered of starvation. Just unbelievable human decimation. Probably the worst human conditions in the modern world.
Well, other than Gaza right now.
Other than Gaza right now.
And the crazy thing is, like, we haven't known about this really. Like,
well, I'll tell you, I protested the Yemenis war all throughout college.
Really?
Yeah, I would actually go to the we went to Boston University. I would go to the engineering career fairs where Raytheon was convincing people to go and sign up for internships and stuff. Yeah. And I would go there with a big flag that says Raytheon is committing genocide. And I would stand in front of their table and give speeches about how terrible that the missiles that they're building are being used to go and bomb things, and how engineers should use their skills for good and not bombs. So I've been knowing this for years.
Okay. So the majority
of people had no idea.
Has no clue that this has been happening. Yeah. And it is a humanitarian crisis nearly on the scale of Gaza. Right?
And the United States was fully culpable. I mean, the United States Air Force needed to participate with the Saudi Air Force because the Saudi government uses U.S. and U.K. armaments, UK and U.S. fighter systems. So, like, there were times where the United States was actually refilling Saudi jets in the middle of the air as it would go and like bomb stuff.
Yeah.
So,
well, we've been allies with the Saudis for 70 years.
Yeah, we've been allies with Saudis forever.
It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason we're allies with Saudi Arabia is a whole other deep dive, which is a whole other topic. But it all stems from World War I and a deal that the British made with the House of Saud. And then when the United States became the grand power, that deal transferred to the U.S.
Okay.
So that's why we're in this bed with Saudi Arabia. But now we're here.
Yeah.
Where Saudi Arabia and the Houthis have been fighting for a long time. There has been a truce signed since 2022 between the Saudis and the Houthis. And it seems the Houthis basically won the war. They control about 2/3 of the Yemenis population, something like that.
Yeah.
So they really
only 1/3 of the territory, but the population is clustered in the southwest part of the country. Which is
exactly. So they have the north and the southwest. They don't have the east and the south, really, right? So Saudi Arabia is trying to get out of this conflict because it's not good for their prestige on the international stage.
No, they've been super embarrassed because they've spent so much money on their military, and they just keep getting beat by these Houthis who are just chilling in the mountains and shooting up super cheap missiles at them.
It's our experience with the Taliban.
Yeah.
It's literally our experience with the Taliban.
Yeah.
And these Houthis are fighters, dude. They've been fighters forever. They've been fighters since 1517. These people have been doing this forever.
Yeah.
This is in their blood. And I don't mean that as the way of like, oh, they're Arabs, so of course they're going to fight. I mean that this people has been systematically attacking quote unquote imperial powers for 500 years.
Yeah.
If you don't think these people know how to fight and know how to deal with this, you are so mistaken.
Yeah. And they've been doing it for, I mean, now it means they know how to do it for clout, and clout is what they're looking for on the international stage. The more attention they get, the more they can impact these major powers, the more recognition they're going to be, the more legitimacy.
And now they're having an issue because they're gaining a lot of legitimacy because the United States is targeting them.
Yes.
Because the United States is bombing them. The UK is bombing them. The Houthis can come out, and now they're like, the anti-American sentiment is increasing very fast.
Yeah.
Very, very fast.
So do you think we shouldn't have bombed them?
So now let's go to the broader conversation, because that's important. I want to end on this one note, and then we'll switch. The Houthis see fighting the United States as their main and most important battle, as if that the United States are the Umayyad Caliphate and their religious leader, Zaidi, fought to abolish over a millennia ago. We are the new Umayyad Caliphate to them, and they are looking to destroy our control over the world global system because we are corrupt and bought by the Jews. That's what they think, and that's the type of enemy we're dealing with. So now let's get to the broader conversation, because this is when it gets interesting. How do we fight them? Do we fight them?
I don't think we do. I don't think we are... I think we only have something to lose as far as giving them legitimacy. I think, and it's terrible because what then can stop this inflationary pressure of hurting our shipping lanes? And I think, honestly, I've been thinking about this a decent amount. This is going to open the door. This is going to normalize countries defending shipping lanes that go past their borders. And this is going to completely accelerate the pace of deglobalization.
Yes.
So I think this is accelerating our progress towards deglobalization. I think it's going to make powers or alliances more regional, and I think those are going to be more important. I think about the U.S.'s alliance with Mexico and our alignment on economic issues and Mexican production kind of supporting the U.S., then becoming our largest trade partner. And I think this just shows that the world is going to continue to go that direction. It's going to give Europe more of a reason to nearshore or onshore their own production, their manufacturing, to try to create more stable energy sources and infrastructure so that they can do that rather than continuing to buy from China. It's shrinking different parts of the world.
Right. Like regional powers will become more prominent.
Yeah.
And and people will become more armed. That's why we see Japan going through an armament exercise and all that. But I want to focus kind of specifically on what the United States can do today. I don't want to talk about... I want to know... I want to know what the U.S. can do right now.
What do you think? Do you think there is anything?
I don't know. I think one of the things that I would recommend, that I would like to see, I think, is a type of armed neutrality. I think I would want something similar to what the U.S. is currently doing, like guiding ships through the Red Sea with armed vessels, destroyers and the rest, that are able to intercept pirate boats, intercept helicopters, all there, right? It's basically what they're doing with the Operation Guardian thing, but not attack Yemen proper. I don't think it's a good idea to bomb the country.
So they continue to just be defensive.
They continue to just be defensive and knock out their supplies as they come and attack us.
But the problem is we've been so that means we're changing nothing besides pulling back on the attacks.
Yeah.
Our defensive posturing already isn't effective. We are being defensive right now, and still the major shipping companies are rerouting. I don't want to do it. Right? So what we're doing, that was my thought at first as well. But if it's not doing anything, I'm okay with continuing to do it because some shipping companies are still going through the canal, but they're also still at risk of getting hit with a missile.
And also, I don't like the precedent getting set that we're going to be held hostage by people who want to close international shipping lanes.
Exactly.
What we want to say that's okay. That's going to incentivize more people to do it. It just will.
Yes.
So,
and it's going to incentivize more smaller, weaker groups to do it because they have so much less to lose, and it's just going to enable more proxy fighting. I think. I don't think a total pullback is. I don't think that is good. But is that only because of political reasons?
No, I think it's. Or what do you mean? What the precedents it's set?
Kind of the reaction in the public.
Oh, I don't know if it's reaction from the public. I think the world will be worse off economically and politically geopolitically by the Houthis feeling that they can do this, and then other terrorist groups thinking that they could do the same.
So you think that our presence there right now does somewhat put the brakes on the deglobalization process that I kind of just described on a broad scale?
I think us being there puts the brakes on deglobalization.
Okay.
I think it does.
Okay.
I think it might be like one of the last gasps of U.S. policing because like Joe Biden was asked straight up, are your bombings against the Houthis working? Nope. Are they going to keep going? Yep.
Yeah.
That's kind of where we're at.
Yes.
And I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, like the only hope is that there's a ceasefire in Gaza and then the Houthis stop because their proclaimed reason for doing this is the war in Gaza and wanting to draw, its support for the people of Gaza and fight back against Israel.
So then is that really the only main takeaway? It's just another reason for Biden to be pressing more for a ceasefire, to be conditioning aid.
But now here's my issue. Today, Hamas rejected a ceasefire agreement with Israel. Israel proposed a 2-month ceasefire for the release of all hostages, and Hamas said no. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? What does Houthis want? If this is why the Houthis aren't operating in good faith. What a shocker, right? A terrorist group isn't operating in good faith. Who would have thought? But the fighters in Palestine, in Gaza, don't want a ceasefire. They don't want it.
No.
They want to keep fighting because they want to win. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with that with the Houthis? What do we do from here? Well, I can call for a ceasefire all I want. I want there to be a ceasefire. Apparently, Israel wants there to be a ceasefire if you release all the hostages. Gaza, Hamas, you don't want a ceasefire?
Do you think the problem might be the terms being 2 months and only 2 months?
Maybe, but wait, you want to? But that's a different conversation now. Now they're asking for a whole peace accord.
Yes. That's
not what the question was. They wanted a ceasefire. They didn't want to solve the problem today. What does that mean?
Hamas? Accord?
Yeah.
Okay.
They've been wanting a ceasefire.
Yes.
The people of Palestine, the people in the West who've been protesting, they want a ceasefire.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think the people who have been protesting want a peace accord.
They don't want a ceasefire?
I think they see a ceasefire as the path to a peace accord.
So, but do the people protesting for a ceasefire see the Palestinians' rejection of the ceasefire as frustrating to them? They must. Yes. I'm frustrated. I want the Palestinians to have their own state. I am in disagreement with Netanyahu. Netanyahu literally said he doesn't believe in a Palestinian state, that he wants river to the sea control of Israel. He's wrong. He's a demagogue. He's fascist. It's disgusting. But the Israeli government offered you a 2-month ceasefire. Who knows what have came out of a 2-month ceasefire?
Yeah.
Less people would have died. How about we start with that? So it frustrates me that the Houthis and the Hamas are using this ceasefire thing as something over our heads.
Sure.
When it's something that neither of them actually want at all.
No.
They're lying.
No. They're just running a propaganda campaign, right? They're just they're drawing not only more attention, but I think more than what they're doing for themselves, an international view of them is what they're doing to Israel.
Yeah.
And they're making Israel evil. And so now you go to you have Israel needing to defend itself against charges of genocide from South Africa at the UN. And that's a bad look, right? And so we're getting
too off topic here.
We're getting off topic
because we need to know what to do about the Houthis.
And I don't think there is anything.
Which is so depressing.
Yeah. I think the only this is what this is doing is just sounding the alarms on let's make our supply chains more resilient.
Deglobalize.
Exactly. Be able to deglobalize, which is
rely on China and Mexico. I'm sorry. Rely on Canada and Mexico.
Exactly.
Not rely on your European partners. Decouple from Asia, except for Japan and Taiwan.
Yeah. Even Japan. I mean, Australia.
I'm curious. I wish I looked into this before this. I really wish I could have known U.S. exports that come through the Suez Canal.
Probably very few. I mean, we are probably the least affected.
Yes.
Right? Because
we're doing the most to defend it.
Yes. Because we are most reliant on the global order.
System.
Yes.
So I think that's a good place to stop.
I guess there's nowhere to get. I've read so many articles, listened to so many podcasts on the Houthis, on Israel, Gaza, and no one knows where this goes. No one has a real path out. Not only how the the Israeli governing coalition and Hamas feels, but the people.
Yeah, we have no idea.
Right? No, the popular support is still there.
Yeah.
Right? So there's literally there's no way forward. There's international community completely in disagreement with what Netanyahu is saying. There's not. I don't think there's anything to be done, and which means that the only thing to do is to try to redirect our efforts elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now, what are we going to do? We're going to do another Operation Defensive Storm, Decisive Storm? No. It's a lost cause.
No.
The Houthis will beat us in any war we try to fight.
Yeah. They'll just survive.
Studying their history, that is the one thing I've learned.
Yeah.
These guys will win any war you fight with them. Yeah. It is worthless to think you can fight them. At
least a war in Yemen.
Yes.
Obviously. Right? The Saudis. That's the thing. I think it's we imperial powers, the Saudis, Iran. I mean, Iran ended up making it work, but the U.S. Just let these tiny poor countries be with their governments that hate you.
Yeah.
Right. We're too scared, which means we put too much money and attention into it, and it just radicalizes them more because they see that we're doing it.
Wait, brain blast.
Okay.
Here's what you do, Joe Biden. Listen to me. This is what you got to do to handle the Houthi problem, okay? You get one of the imams and you bribe them. This has worked in the past. You bribe them. You get them to sell out. And once they sell out, then there's going to be an internal Houthi civil war, okay? And then that'll take all the weapons out of them. They'll spend all their money against fighting each other. So go find an imam who's bribable and get him on your payroll. There you go. CIA, do your thing.
It is hilarious that you said that because I was in a Twitter conversation where someone told me exactly the same thing.
That's hilarious. Smart guy.
Maybe.
That's what you got to do. Go do it.
It'll maintain the humanitarian crisis, but maybe we'll have shipping.
Yeah. Oh, God. I feel so gross saying that, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's the truth.
Whatever.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.